What if the most ancient structures humanity ever built were never meant to touch the ground at all? Imagine standing at the base of a cliff face in the Andes, your neck craned backward, eyes tracing the vertical stone until it disappears into cloud and mist. Somewhere up there, impossibly high, clinging to rock that no modern climber would attempt without ropes and pitons and prayer, sits a structure. Not a cave, not a natural formation, a built thing. Walls fitted with precision, doorways facing the void, platforms extending into empty air. The wind carries no answers, only questions that taste like altitude and time. These structures exist. They are real. You can see them in satellite imagery now, though for centuries they were known only to condors and to the myths whispered in valleys far below. They perch on cliff faces in Peru, in Tibet, in the American Southwest. Places where the air thins and the sky presses close. Places where no rational purpose for building can be easily explained. And if you're the kind of mind that wanders between the cracks of accepted history, between what we're told and what the stones themselves remember, then stay with me now. Like this video, if you feel that pull toward the mysteries that sleep in high places. Subscribe, but only if you're drawn to the kind of history that builds upward into impossibility. And tell me in the comments below where you're listening from, what does the sky look like where you are right now? Because this story is about the sky, about what we took from it, about a civilization that looked upward not with wonder, but with intention, with need, with tools capable of harvesting what fell from the heavens. The first time archaeologists documented these cliff dwellings in the sacred valley of Peru, they assumed religious function. Temples, they said, ritual spaces, places where priests might commune with gods in the thin air where earth and sky converge. It's a reasonable interpretation. We modern humans, we build churches on hills, mosques with minarets, cathedrals with spires reaching upward. We associate height with the divine. But then they found the tools. Not ceremonial objects, not offerings or idols. Tools, hammers and chisels and implements worn smooth by use. And the metal, here's where the story shifts, where the ground beneath conventional interpretation begins to crack. The metal wasn't copper or bronze or iron smelted from earthly ore. It was meteoritic. Pause there for a moment. Let that word settle. Meteoritic. Metal that fell from the sky, forged in the furnaces of dying stars, traveling through the cosmic dark for millions of years before friction and gravity brought it screaming through our atmosphere, burning bright, embedding itself in mountain and tundra and ice. Someone found those fallen fragments. Someone recognized them not as sacred objects to be worshipped, but as resources to be used. Someone had the metallurgical knowledge to distinguish celestial iron from terrestrial, to understand that this metal, this gift from beyond, possessed qualities that earthbound metals lacked. Hardness, durability, an edge that held. They forged it, shaped it, carried it up impossible heights to build structures that served a purpose we can no longer quite grasp. The conventional narrative suggests these high structures were built over time, gradually, by people who lived in the valleys and made pilgrimages upward for spiritual reasons. That the meteoritic tools were rare, precious, used sparingly for special purposes. But look at the sheer number of these sites. Map them. They cluster in specific regions, yes, but within those regions, they appear with startling frequency. Cliff after cliff, peak after peak. Always high, always exposed to the sky. And the tools, meteoritic metal, appears in these contexts far more commonly than random chance would allow. As if the builders weren't merely opportunistic, using fallen sky metal when they happened upon it. As if they were actively searching, collecting, stockpiling, as if they knew what was coming from above and when. The myths remember differently than the archaeologists interpret. In Quechua tradition, there are stories of the star stones, fragments that fell during specific celestial events, during showers of light that painted the night sky. The myths say these stones carried power. Not spiritual power, though that interpretation was layered on later, through centuries of cultural shift and colonial rewriting. The original meaning, preserved in the oldest tellings, is more direct. The stones carried work. They enabled work. They made possible what could not otherwise be achieved. In Tibet, high in the Himalayas, there are structures called Sky fortresses. Zongs built at altitudes where permanent habitation is nearly impossible. The official history dates most of them to the medieval period, built by Buddhist kingdoms as defensive positions or monastic retreats. But beneath some of these structures, in foundation layers that predate the Buddhist period by centuries, perhaps millennia, archaeologists have found the same pattern. Construction at impossible heights using tools forged from meteoritic iron. The Tibetan myths speak of the Namlkags, literally sky iron. They tell of ancestors who watched the heavens, who knew when the sky would gift the earth with metal, who climbed to high places to collect what fell, not to worship it, to use it. In the American Southwest, among the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Puebloans, there's a curious detail often overlooked in tourist interpretations. Yes, these structures are lower, more accessible than the Andean or Himalayan examples. But in the highest, most remote sites, the ones requiring technical climbing even today, archaeologists have recovered tools made from an iron-nickel alloy consistent with meteoritic origin. The same pattern. High places, sky metal, structures built where it seems no one should build. What were they mining? That's the question that conventional archaeology doesn't quite ask, because the answer seems obvious. Nothing. There are no ore deposits at these elevations. No gold veins, no copper seams, no reason to establish mining operations where the logistics of extraction would be impossible. But perhaps that's the wrong kind of mining. Consider the word itself. Mining. We think of it as going down into the earth, extracting what's hidden below. But what if a civilization developed the opposite technique? What if they mined upward, toward the sky, harvesting what descended from above? The meteoritic tool evidence isn't scattered randomly across the archaeological record. It concentrates in specific periods, windows of time that, when cross-referenced with paleoclimatic data and astronomical records, correlate with known meteor shower events. Times when the Earth passed through debris fields left by comets, when the night sky would have blazed with falling stars, when fragments of cosmic material would have rained down across specific geographical regions. The builders knew. They anticipated. They positioned themselves at high altitudes, at exposed locations, where the falling material would be easiest to locate and collect before it was buried by erosion or lost in dense vegetation. They weren't building temples. They were building collection stations, observation posts, processing facilities. Look at the architectural features with fresh eyes. Those platforms extending into empty air. Perhaps they weren't ceremonial stages but collection surfaces, areas where small meteoritic fragments could be gathered before wind scattered them down the cliff face. Those precise doorways and windows, perhaps they weren't aligned with solstices for religious reasons but oriented toward specific regions of the sky, toward the radiant points of known meteor showers. The structures that seem most baffling, most purposeless, suddenly acquire function when you understand them as infrastructure for aerial mining. And if you're still with me, if your mind is turning over these possibilities like smooth stones in your palm, then you're exactly where this story wants you. We're going deeper now into layers where conventional explanations grow thin and the air tastes of something older. The metallurgical analysis of these tools reveals something else, something that makes materials scientists uncomfortable when they publish their findings in academic journals, burying the implications in technical language. The forging techniques are sophisticated. Too sophisticated for the time periods to which these sites are traditionally dated. Meteoritic iron is difficult to work. It contains high levels of nickel, which raises the melting point and makes the metal resistant to traditional forge methods. Modern blacksmiths, attempting to recreate ancient meteoritic metalworking techniques, have struggled to achieve the same quality of edge and durability found in archaeological examples. Yet here are tools created thousands of years ago by people we're told had only rudimentary metallurgical knowledge, exhibiting evidence of advanced temperature control, precise carbon content management, and sophisticated understanding of alloy properties. The tools are too good, too refined, as if the makers had centuries of experience working specifically with celestial metals, or as if they were remembering how it was done before. There's a site in the Altai Mountains, straddling the border between Russia, Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan. It's called Gorno-Altaisk in modern designation, but the local name translates roughly to where the sky gave gifts. The structures here are smaller than the Andean examples, more integrated into natural cave formations, but the pattern holds. High altitude, difficult access, evidence of long-term occupation despite the harsh environment. And in the deepest archaeological layers, beneath pottery and hearths and all the recognizable markers of human habitation, they found something else. Cache. Dozens of meteoritic fragments, sorted by size and composition, stored deliberately. Not displayed, not arranged ceremonially, stored as raw material, as inventory. Next to the cache were tools in various stages of completion. Rough forgings, partially finished blades, grinding stones with metallic residue. It wasn't a temple, it was a workshop. The dating placed the cache at approximately 12,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries, right at the boundary of the Younger Dryas, that mysterious period of rapid climate fluctuation that saw the end of the last ice age, and many researchers now believe the collapse of whatever advanced culture might have existed before. Before the flood waters rose, before the myths began. The Chinese archaeologists who published the findings suggested it was a site used by nomadic groups for tool production, taking advantage of locally available meteoritic materials. But here's what the report doesn't emphasize. There are no known significant meteorite impact sites in that region. No obvious source for the volume of celestial iron found in the cache. Meaning either the fragments were transported there from distant locations, a massive logistical undertaking for a supposedly nomadic, rudimentary society, or the people who established that site knew something we don't about where and when meteoritic material becomes available. They knew how to predict the sky's offerings. In the myths, and yes, we must turn to myths now because the archaeological record goes silent on questions of purpose and knowledge, there are recurring themes that span cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The Dogon people of Mali speak of sky metal used by ancestors to cut the paths between worlds. The phrase has been interpreted metaphorically, as spiritual or mythological, but what if it was literal? What if the paths weren't spiritual but geographical, physical routes carved through mountain and cliff, enabled by tools harder and more durable than anything earthbound metals could provide? The Maori of New Zealand have traditions of stones from Rengi, the Sky Father, that fell during significant events, stones that were shaped into tools of great importance, tools that opened what was closed. In Norse mythology, the dwarves, those master craftsmen of legend, were said to forge with star metal, creating weapons and tools of incomparable quality. The myths place the dwarves in mountains, in high halls carved from stone, in places where the sky comes close. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. Sky metal, high places, knowledge of celestial timing, tools that enable extraordinary work. What was the extraordinary work? We've established that these high structures exist, that they were built using meteoritic metals, that they cluster in regions and time periods associated with meteor shower activity. We've suggested they functioned as collection and processing stations for aerial mining operations. But mining implies extraction of something valuable, something worth the immense effort and danger of establishing facilities at altitudes where humans struggle to breathe, where construction materials must be carried up impossible slopes, where a single misstep means death on rocks far below. What could be valuable enough? The easy answer is the metal itself. Iron was precious in the pre-Bronze Age world, and meteoritic iron even more so. A civilization that could stockpile sky iron would have military, economic, and technological advantages over neighbors still using stone tools. But this answer doesn't fully satisfy when you consider the scale. The distribution of these sites, the consistency of the pattern across continents, suggests something more than opportunistic resource gathering. Suggests coordination, system, purpose beyond simple tool-making. Let's approach it differently. Let's ask, what else falls from the sky? Modern astronomy has cataloged thousands of tons of extraterrestrial material that enters Earth's atmosphere annually. Most burns up, shooting stars, brief streaks of light. But a percentage survives the friction and heat, reaches the surface. Meteorites, yes, but also micrometeorites, cosmic dust, particles so small they drift down slowly, accumulating in ice cores and ocean sediments, invisible to the naked eye but present nonetheless. And within this cosmic rain, this constant gentle bombardment from space, is a periodic table of elements. Everything that exists in the solar system in varying concentrations. Iron and nickel, certainly, but also platinum group metals, rare earth elements, isotopes with unique properties. Modern mining operations spend billions extracting these materials from deep in the Earth's crust. But they also exist in meteorites, sometimes in higher concentrations than terrestrial ores. What if an ancient civilization discovered this? What if they developed systematic methods for collecting not just the obvious iron meteorites but the subtler deposits, the cosmic dust that accumulated in high places where wind patterns concentrated it, where ice and snow captured it before it could be scattered? The high structures positioned precisely where atmospheric conditions would maximize collection. The platforms and surfaces designed to capture fine particulate matter. The tools capable of processing materials too hard, too refractory for ordinary implements. It would explain the persistence, the dedication, the sense that these sites were maintained not for a few generations but across centuries, perhaps millennia. Because the mining never stopped. Every year, the sky offers its gifts. Every year, the ancient collectors would return to the high places, watching, waiting, harvesting. If this feels like speculation stretching beyond evidence, stay with me, just a bit further, because there's one more piece of the pattern we haven't examined yet. The structures aren't identical, but they share architectural features that serve no obvious practical purpose unless you're thinking about aerial phenomena. Circular platforms, open to the sky, often with central depressions or basins carved into stone. In archaeological interpretation, these are called ritual features, which is academia's polite way of saying, we don't know what this is for. The assumption is religious, altars for sky worship, perhaps, places to make offerings to celestial gods. But consider an alternative. These features are functional. The circular platforms provide stable, level surfaces at high altitude. The central basins serve as collection points where smaller fragments, dust, particulate matter would naturally accumulate, concentrated by wind patterns, ready for periodic harvesting. Some of the basins show evidence of water exposure, mineral deposits consistent with repeated wetting and drying. Perhaps they weren't just passive collectors but active processing stations where water was used to separate and concentrate heavier metallic particles from lighter mineral dust. The same technique modern gold prospectors use with panning. The ancients weren't worshipping the sky. They were processing it. And here, in this quiet revelation, we might pause together. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of this possibility settle. Somewhere in your home, in the device you're using to hear these words, are elements that were born in stellar explosions, that traveled through space, that eventually fell to Earth. We are all, in some sense, collectors of cosmic material. These ancient miners understood this connection more directly than we do, with our intermediated technology, our supply chains that obscure origins. They touched what fell from heaven and understood it as resource, as gift, as renewal. In the Andean traditions preserved by Karo communities, there's a concept called Ani, reciprocity, balance, mutual exchange. The relationship between earth and sky is understood through this lens. The sky gives to the earth and the earth gives back. In ceremonial contexts, this is expressed through offerings. Coca leaves, woven textiles, carefully arranged stones. But what if the original expression of Ani was more direct? What if it was transactional, material? The sky provides metal and minerals. The humans provide what? The myths suggest awareness, tension, observation. Many of the high structures align with astronomical phenomena. Not just meteor showers but planetary movements, lunar cycles, stellar risings. They function as observatories, as calendrical systems, as monuments of measurement. Perhaps the reciprocity was this. The sky provides material and in return humans witness. Remember, track the patterns. Maintain the knowledge of cycles and returns. This is not worship. This is partnership. Contract, a civilization in active relationship with cosmic processes. And perhaps this is what made them different from us. We modern humans, we mine the earth brutally, extracting without replacement, consuming without reciprocity. We look at the sky as empty space, as something to cross but not to harvest. They understood something we've forgotten. They positioned themselves as intermediaries between Earth and cosmos, collecting what fell from above, processing it, integrating it into their technologies and structures. They didn't conquer the sky. They cooperated with it. The tools found at these sites often show evidence of repeated sharpening, of careful maintenance, of being used until they were too small to function and then carefully deposited, retired. There's reverence in that pattern, but also practicality. These tools were precious not because they were sacred, but because they were effective. Because they enabled work that otherwise would be impossible. In the Tibetan dzongs, in the deepest, oldest chambers, there are sometimes small alcoves carved into walls, spaces just large enough to hold a single tool or a few fragments of worked metal. These aren't treasure caches. The contents, when archaeologists find them undisturbed, are modest. A single blade, a hammerhead, a collection of metal scraps. They're archives, samples, a record of what was collected, what was forged, what techniques were used. As if the builders knew their knowledge might be lost. As if they were leaving evidence for whoever might come after, whoever might one day climb these heights and wonder what ancient hands accomplished here. You're still here, still listening. Your mind perhaps drifting between sleep and attention, that liminal space where deep questions feel more real than daylight logic allows. Good. This is where the story wants you. Where the boundaries between history and mystery blur like horizon lines at dusk. Because now we must ask the question that archaeology avoids. When did this begin? The sites we can date, using radiocarbon, using stratigraphy, using all the careful methods of modern science, give us glimpses spanning the last 12,000 years. The younger Dryas boundary and forward. But the oldest sites, the ones with the most sophisticated meteoritic metalworking, appear fully formed. There's no evolutionary progression from crude attempts to refined technique. The knowledge seems to arrive complete, as if it was remembered, not invented. In the sacred valley of Peru, beneath the structures that tourists photograph, there are older layers. Much older. Geologists examining the cliff faces have identified evidence of previous construction phases, earlier modifications to the rock that are no longer fully intact, eroded by time and weather into ambiguous shapes that could be natural or could be the remnants of something built. The dating methods become uncertain at these depths, these ages. But the estimates reach back into the Pleistocene, into periods when conventional history says humans were still hunter-gatherers, still using stone tools, still tens of thousands of years away from metallurgy or architecture. Yet here is evidence of modification, of purpose, of presence at high altitudes during Ice Age conditions that should have made such locations uninhabitable. What were they doing there? The conventional explanation, when archaeologists acknowledge these anomalies at all, is that the older modifications are natural formations being misinterpreted, or that dating methods are unreliable at such scales, or that a few isolated groups might have occasionally sheltered in these locations without establishing permanent presence. But the pattern is too consistent, too widespread. From the Andes to the Himalayas to the Altai to isolated peaks in the American Southwest, the same signature, high-altitude occupation during time periods that shouldn't support it, associated with working of celestial metals. It's as if, at the end of the Ice Age, at that mysterious boundary when megafauna went extinct and sea levels rose and human civilization supposedly began with agriculture in river valleys, it's as if something else was happening simultaneously in the high places. Something that continued, in reduced form, through all the millennia we think of as the dawn of civilization. The Sumerian king list, that ancient text we explored in other histories, speaks of kingship lowered from heaven after the flood. But there are older Sumerian texts, fragmentary, harder to interpret, that speak of knowledge coming from the high places, from those who watch the sky, from groups that existed before the waters came. These texts don't describe sky watchers as priests or mystics. They describe them as craftsmen, as makers, as possessors of techniques for working materials that came from beyond the world. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the hero seeks immortality, he travels to the mountains, to high places where he encounters beings with ancient knowledge. These beings are described as gatekeepers, as guardians of secrets older than kingdoms, older than cities. What if these weren't metaphorical beings? What if they were the remnant populations of the sky miners, the aerial harvesters, the people who maintained the high stations even as the rest of humanity developed agriculture and writing and warfare in the valleys below? What if there were always two humanities, in a sense? The valley dwellers and the peak keepers. The farmers and the miners. The ones who looked down at earth and the ones who looked up at sky. And what if the second group, the sky watchers, were older? This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for conventional timelines. Because if meteoritic metalworking was happening 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, then our entire narrative of technological progression collapses. Stone Age gives way to Copper Age, gives way to Bronze Age, gives way to Iron Age. This neat linear sequence that we teach in schools, that organizes our museums, that structures our understanding of human development. But the evidence from high-altitude sites suggests parallel development. Suggests that metallurgy, sophisticated metallurgy, might have existed in isolated communities long before it appeared in the civilizations we recognize as first. And if that's true, what else might have existed? What other technologies, what other knowledges, developed in these aerial stations, preserved by groups who chose altitude over agriculture, sky over soil? The myths preserve hints. Across cultures, there are stories of first teachers, of beings or people who came from high places to instruct valley dwellers in arts and sciences. The Apkallu of Mesopotamian tradition, the Viracocha of Andean myth, the rishis of Vedic texts. Modern interpretation reads these as gods or mythological figures. But strip away the supernatural overlay, the centuries of religious reinterpretation, and you find a consistent core. Knowledge bearers from high places, possessing techniques for working metal, for reading stars, for measuring time. Not gods, humans. But humans who had maintained traditions and technologies from before the flood, before the climate catastrophe that reset so much of human development. The aerial miners, the sky harvesters, the ones who never stopped watching, never stopped collecting, never stopped working with what fell from heaven. And perhaps, here's where speculation becomes something deeper, something that feels less like theory and more like recovered memory. Perhaps they didn't just collect what randomly fell. Perhaps they could predict, could calculate, could position themselves precisely where and when meteoritic material would arrive. The astronomical alignments of the high structures support this. They aren't crude approximations. They're precise. Some align with meteor shower radiance with accuracy that requires generations of observation and mathematical sophistication. They were tracking, recording, building predictive models. In essence, they were doing what modern astronomers do with computers and telescopes, but they were doing it with naked eyes and stone markers and accumulated wisdom passed down through bloodlines. And they were using that knowledge to harvest the sky. If your mind is reeling slightly, if you're feeling the vertigo that comes from looking at history from a new angle, that's appropriate. That's the feeling of old certainties shifting. Let it happen. Breathe into it. The truth has always been stranger than the sanitized versions we're taught. There's a meteorite crater in what is now Arizona Meteor Crater, appropriately named. It's approximately 50,000 years old, nearly a mile across, the result of a nickel-iron meteorite some 50 meters in diameter impacting at tremendous velocity. For thousands of years, the local peoples, Navajo, Hopi, others, had traditions about the site. They called it different names, but the meanings converged. Place where the sky struck the earth. Place of star metal. Place of power. When European settlers arrived in the 19th century, they initially thought the crater was volcanic. It took decades before scientists accepted it was an impact site. And when mining operations began in the early 1900s, the operators were searching for the main meteorite body, expecting to find millions of tons of nickel iron buried beneath the crater floor. They found almost nothing. Fragments, scattered pieces. The main mass had vaporized on impact, or had been dispersed so thoroughly that it was unrecoverable. But the indigenous peoples had stories of sky metal from that place, stories of tools forged from starstone collected near the crater. Archaeologists initially dismissed these as confused legends, perhaps conflating the crater with meteorite falls from other times and places. Then they started finding the artifacts, meteoritic metal tools in prehistoric sites radiating outward from the crater, some dating to within a few thousand years of the impact event itself, which means people were there. Shortly after a cosmic collision that would have been visible for hundreds of miles, that would have sent shockwaves and heat and devastation across the landscape, Shortly after that cataclysm, people returned, searched, collected, carried away fragments of the impactor, not fleeing from the sky's violence, moving toward it, harvesting it. This pattern repeats at impact sites around the world. Wherever a meteorite of significant size has struck in the last 50,000 years, wherever the crater remains identifiable, you find evidence of ancient human presence. Tools made from impact material, structures built within or near the crater rims, signs of long-term activity focused on collection and processing. Modern minds interpret this through the lens of religious awe. Surely these sites were sacred, places of supernatural significance where the gods had touched the earth. But what if the significance was practical? What if these impact sites were the motherlode, the jackpot, the locations where years' worth of sky metal could be harvested in concentrated form? The people who built the high stations, who watched meteor showers and collected what fell on mountain peaks, they would have known about impact events, would have tracked them, would have passed down knowledge of where the sky had struck hardest, where the greatest concentrations of celestial material could be found. They would have made pilgrimages, established processing camps, spent generations, perhaps, extracting every usable fragment before returning to their aerial stations to resume the patient work of collecting smaller, more frequent falls. In the Australian outback, there are impact structures called the Henbury Craters, a cluster of impact sites created approximately 4,700 years ago. The Luritja people, the traditional custodians of that land, have dreamtime stories about the event. They describe the sky opening, fire and thunder, star beings descending. And they describe, in language that ethnographers recorded before fully understanding the crater field's origins, the collection of special stones from the impact sites. Stones used for tools. Stones traded with distant groups. Stones of great value. When archaeologists surveyed the craters in detail, they found evidence of this collection activity. Depressions where someone had dug, systematic searching patterns around each impact point. And they found tools, left behind perhaps as offerings or markers, forged from meteoritic iron. The pattern holds. Impact event, followed shortly by human presence, followed by systematic harvesting. They weren't afraid of what fell from heaven. They were prepared for it. And maybe this is the thought that should make your scalp prickle, should make you question what else we've misunderstood about our ancestors. Maybe they could predict the large impacts too. Not with our modern mathematical precision, no, but with observation and pattern recognition accumulated over thousands of years, with knowledge of celestial cycles that we've only rediscovered in the last century. Perhaps they recognized the signatures of incoming objects. Perhaps they watched the skies not just with wonder but with calculation. There are petroglyphs in Utah, near some of the high cliff dwellings we discussed earlier, that show curious symbols. Circles with rays, spirals, geometric patterns that archaeoastronomers have interpreted as representing celestial events. Comets, meteors, possibly solar eclipses. But one panel, weathered nearly smooth, shows what looks like a trajectory. A dotted line descending from a circle at the top of the rock face down to a burst pattern at the bottom. Next to it, carved much deeper, protected from erosion by an overhanging rock, are symbols that seem to represent counting. Marks grouped in sets, as if measuring, as if recording time to impact. The dating is imprecise, but the petroglyph is old. Very old. Older than the civilization that built the cliff dwellings. Older than the pottery styles and arrowhead types that we use to categorize the prehistoric Southwest. Someone stood at that rock face and carved a prediction. Or a memory. Or both. A record of what had been observed, left as instruction for those who would come after. This is what the high stations preserved. Not religious knowledge, but practical astronomy. Applied celestial mechanics. The mathematics of predicting what falls from the sky and where it might land. And they used that knowledge to position themselves, to harvest, to forge tools from star metal that would give them capabilities beyond any earth-dwelling contemporaries. This was their advantage, their secret, the reason some lineages, some groups, maintained technological sophistication while others still chipped flint. Access to the sky's resources. If you're feeling sleepy now, let yourself drift. Let these images move through your mind. High peaks in moonlight, figures watching the stars, hammer striking meteoritic iron in a forge built from cloud-touching stone. Let history and dream blend, because maybe that's where truth lives anyway, in the spaces between what we can prove and what we remember in our blood. But we haven't yet addressed the question that lurks beneath all of this, the question that makes this more than just an interesting archaeological mystery. Why did it stop? Or did it? The great high stations, the ones we've been exploring, most show signs of abandonment. Not sudden catastrophe, but gradual withdrawal. Fewer tools in later layers. Longer gaps between occupation periods. Eventually, silence. The conventional timeline says these sites were in active use from roughly 10,000 BCE to 2000 BCE, with the greatest activity concentrated in the early period, right after the Younger Dryas. By the time of the Great Valley civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus, the high stations were already becoming memories, places visited occasionally for ritual purposes but no longer serving their original function. Why would a civilization abandon a technology that gave them such advantage? One answer is resource depletion. Perhaps the easily accessible meteoritic material ran out. The obvious impact sites had been harvested. The meteor showers that had been most productive declined in intensity as the Earth's orbit carried it through different regions of the solar system, away from the debris streams that had been so generous in earlier millennia. The sky's gifts became less frequent, less generous. The effort required to maintain the high stations no longer justified the returns. So the aerial miners came down from the peaks, brought their knowledge of metalworking, of astronomy, of mathematics into the valleys, became the teachers of myth, shared what they could, adapted what they must. And eventually, after generations of living in the lowlands, their descendants forgot what their ancestors had been, forgot the patient work of harvesting the sky, remembered only garbled stories of beings who lived in high places, who worked with star metal, who possessed ancient wisdom. The knowledge became mythologized. The practical became spiritual. The tools became relics. This is one answer. It's tidy. It fits with what we know about resource cycles and technological adaptation. But there's another possibility. What if they didn't stop? What if the practice simply went underground, became hidden, was preserved by small groups who recognized the value of secrecy? Because here's an unsettling fact. Meteoritic metal working never completely disappeared. Even during periods when conventional history says human metallurgy was primitive, focused only on copper and bronze, examples of meteoritic iron artifacts continue to appear. King Tutankhamun's dagger, forged from meteoritic iron 1,000 years before Egypt supposedly mastered iron smelting. Weapons from Siberian burial mounds, containing celestial nickel signatures, predating local Iron Age by centuries. Tools from Greenland, from the Arctic, where indigenous peoples were still forging with meteoritic iron when European explorers arrived in the 19th century, using techniques passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years. The practice didn't die. It diminished. It became specialized, rare, the province of specific lineages who maintained the old ways. And perhaps, in some places, it continued in forms we wouldn't recognize. The high stations were abandoned, yes, but the watching continued. The tracking of celestial events. The knowledge of when and where the sky gives its gifts. Secret societies and esoteric orders across cultures have claimed possession of ancient knowledge, of techniques and understandings preserved from before the flood, before the fall, before the forgetting. Most of this is probably fantasy, wish fulfillment, the human tendency to mythologize and aggrandize. But not all of it. Some metallurgical techniques preserved in medieval alchemical texts describe working with philosophical mercury and celestial iron, using methods that make no sense if you interpret them symbolically but become remarkably practical if you read them as encrypted instructions for processing meteoritic metals. Some astronomical texts from the Islamic Golden Age, from the Chinese imperial observatories, from the Mayan codices, contain tracking data for meteor streams with precision that seems unnecessary for purely calendrical purposes, unless you were trying to predict harvest opportunities for celestial materials. The knowledge went quiet. But quiet isn't the same as extinct. And in our modern era, we're rediscovering what they knew. We're mining meteorites again, though we call it differently. We're extracting rare earth elements from cosmic debris. We're positioning satellites and spacecraft to intercept and collect samples from asteroids and comets. We're harvesting the sky. We think we're innovating, but perhaps we're remembering. Perhaps someone somewhere preserved enough of the old knowledge to plant seeds, to whisper hints into the right ears, to ensure that when humanity was ready, when we had the technology to fully exploit what falls from heaven, the path would already be there, waiting for us to rediscover it. This is speculation, but it's informed speculation, built on patterns, on evidence, on the recognition that knowledge once gained rarely disappears completely. Transforms. It adapts. It waits. The high stations are mostly abandoned now, yes, but they still stand, still mark the sky, still carry in their stones the memory of what hands built them and why. You can visit some of them. Trek to the sacred valley, hire guides, climb the exhausting trails that switch back up impossible cliffs. When you reach the structures, when you stand on those platforms that hang above the void, you'll feel it. Not divine presence, not spiritual energy, though you can interpret it that way if you wish. You'll feel purpose, function, the same feeling you'd get standing in an old factory, an abandoned mine, a defunct industrial site. This place was built to do something, to accomplish work. And for a time, it did. The work is finished now. The sky's easy gifts have been collected. The people moved on. But the structures remain, bearing witness, saying to anyone who learns to read them, we were here. We watched. We harvested what fell from heaven. We forged it into tools. We understood this relationship between Earth and cosmos long before you rediscovered it with your satellites and your spectrometers. We were the first sky miners. And you, with your space programs and asteroid capture initiatives and orbital resource extraction plans, you are the second. Or perhaps we're the same people, separated by a forgetting, now remembering, now returning to what we always were. Look up tonight if the sky is clear where you are. Find a dark place, away from city lights if you can. Let your eyes adjust. Wait. On any given night, if you watch long enough, you'll see them. Shooting stars, meteors, tiny fragments of cosmic debris entering Earth's atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour, burning bright for a moment before disappearing. Most vaporize completely, but some survive. Some make it through the fire and friction, cool during the descent, and land. Somewhere. On ocean or desert or ice sheet or forest floor. Every day, tons of extraterrestrial material settles onto Earth's surface. Most of it is dust, micrometeorites too small to see individually. But larger fragments fall too. Meteorites. Some are found quickly, bright, obvious, different from surrounding rocks. Others lie hidden for years, decades, millennia, until someone who knows what to look for spots the telltale signs. Fusion crust, unusual density, metallic sheen. The sky is still giving gifts. The rain of cosmic material never stopped. But we moderns, we don't position ourselves to receive it. We stumble upon meteorites by accident, treat them as curiosities, sell them to collectors or donate them to museums. We've forgotten how to watch with purpose, how to predict and collect systematically. The ancient aerial miners would find our approach wasteful, inefficient. They would look at our cities built in valleys and on coasts, our population centers far from the high places, and they would understand why we've forgotten. We've optimized for other things: agriculture, trade, defense. Not for harvesting the sky, but the knowledge can return. Perhaps it is returning. There are people today, modern meteorite hunters, who pursue fallen space rocks with dedication that borders on obsession. They study meteor reports, calculate impact zones, rush to predicted locations, sweep deserts and ice fields with metal detectors and trained eyes. They're not academics or scientists, mostly. They're individuals, often self-taught, who've learned to read the sky, to interpret fireball sightings, to calculate where the fragments might land. They're recapitulating, without knowing it, what the ancient sky miners perfected thousands of years ago. And their finds fuel a growing industry. Meteorites are valuable not just to collectors but to researchers, to material scientists, to aerospace engineers who study their composition and structure. Because meteorites contain things Earth doesn't readily provide. They're samples of the early solar system, of planetary formation processes, of cosmic events we can't replicate or directly observe. They're resources from beyond our world, just as valuable now as they were when ancient smiths forged them into tools that could cut what earthbound metals couldn't touch. History is cyclical. What was forgotten gets remembered. What was old becomes new again. And perhaps that's the real meaning of those high structures, those aerial mining stations built at impossible altitudes by people who watched the sky with understanding we're only beginning to recover. They were markers, signposts, saying, "We did this. We knew this." When you climb high enough, when you remember how to watch properly, you'll understand. You'll return to the practice. You'll mine the sky again, but with tools we couldn't imagine, with capabilities that make our meteoritic forges seem quaint. You'll do what we did, but at scales we could only dream of. Because that's where this story is heading, isn't it? Toward a future where asteroid mining is commonplace, where we position collection stations not on mountain peaks but in orbit, where the resources of the solar system become accessible in ways that make Earth-based extraction obsolete. We'll harvest the sky with spacecraft instead of patience, with laser cutters instead of meteoritic hammers, with automation instead of ancestral lineages passing down observational knowledge. But the impulse is the same. The understanding that Earth's resources are limited, but the skies are vast. The recognition that what falls from heaven can be collected, processed, used. The ancient miners were pioneers of a practice we're rediscovering on grander scales. And in that rediscovery, perhaps we'll find other things they knew. Other techniques, other understandings hidden in the structures they left behind, waiting for minds capable of interpreting them. Because the high stations aren't just empty ruins. They're encoded information. Their positions, their alignments, their architectural features. These things mean something if you know how to read them. Modern archaeoastronomers, studying these sites with computers and satellite imagery and precise measurement tools, keep finding new alignments, new connections, relationships between structures separated by continents that show mathematical correspondences too precise to be accidental. Networks, systems, as if the aerial miners weren't isolated groups but coordinated operations, sharing information across vast distances, working together toward common goals. How did they communicate? How did groups in the Andes coordinate with groups in the Himalayas? This was before writing, supposedly, before organized long-distance trade, before civilizations as we recognize them. Yet the pattern is there. The same techniques, the same astronomical knowledge, the same meteoritic metalworking sophistication appearing simultaneously in regions separated by oceans. Either it was convergent evolution, different groups independently discovering the same practices at the same time, or there was contact, exchange, a network of knowledge sharing that spans our current understanding of prehistoric human capabilities. The myths, again, preserve hints, stories of travelers, of wanderers, of those who walked the high roads between mountain peaks, carrying knowledge, carrying tools, carrying bloodlines. What we dismiss as mythology might have been geography. Literal descriptions of trade routes and knowledge exchange systems that operated above the world we think of as the stage for human development. While the first farmers were domesticating wheat in river valleys, while hunters were following megafauna across Ice Age landscapes, perhaps there was already a different kind of civilization operating in the thin air of high altitude, smaller in population, specialized in function, but sophisticated in their understanding of celestial mechanics and material science. Not better or more advanced in all ways, but different, parallel, adapted to a specific ecological and technological niche. And when their resource base diminished, when the effort required to maintain the high stations exceeded the returns, they descended, merged with valley populations, contributed their knowledge to the civilizations rising along the Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yellow River, became the specialized craftsmen, the metalworkers, the astronomers, the keepers of calendars and observers of portents. Their identity as a separate people dissolved, but their knowledge seeped into the foundations of everything that came after. Every bronze sword, every iron tool, every astronomical calendar, every mathematical insight, all of it carrying traces of what the sky miners learned when they watched and harvested and forged in the high, cold places where earth and heaven meet. There's a psychological dimension to this story we haven't fully explored. A question not just of technology and resources, but of consciousness itself. What does it do to a people to spend generations watching the sky with that kind of intensity? To orient your entire civilization around harvesting what falls from above. It changes how you think about your place in the cosmos. The valley dwellers, our ancestors, the farmers and herders, and eventually city builders, they looked down. Their relationship was with soil, with growing things, with cycles of planting and harvest tied to earthly seasons. Their myths were of earth gods, fertility deities, underworld journeys. But the aerial miners looked up. Their relationship was with the void, with the vast dark between stars, with celestial cycles that dwarf human timescales. They understood, in a visceral way that we've only recovered through telescopes and mathematics, that Earth is not separate from the cosmos, that we exist in a continuum with stellar processes, that what happens in the furnaces of dying stars millions of years ago shapes what we hold in our hands today. Every meteoritic tool was a tangible connection to that truth, a piece of cosmic history, forged in stellar explosions, traveling through space, surviving the violent descent through atmosphere, and finally shaped by human hands into something useful. Holding such a tool, working with such a tool, you couldn't forget your place in the larger universe. You couldn't develop the illusion of human separateness that came to define so much of later civilization. The sky miners were cosmically conscious in a way we're only now, with our space telescopes and planetary missions, beginning to reclaim. And perhaps that consciousness shaped other aspects of their culture. Perhaps it made them less territorial, less concerned with ownership and boundaries. Because when you spend your nights watching meteor showers, tracking celestial cycles that repeat over decades, understanding that Earth is a small platform in an infinite sea, petty human conflicts must seem even more petty. The structures they built reflect this. No fortifications, no defensive walls, no evidence of warfare or conflict. Contrast this with the valley civilizations that arose later. Almost immediately, they're building walls, armies, establishing borders, fighting over territory and resources. But the high stations show no such patterns. They're exposed, vulnerable by any military standard. Yet they persisted for thousands of years. Either they were incredibly lucky, never encountering hostile groups, or, more intriguingly, they existed in a social paradigm where such defenses weren't necessary, where their specialized knowledge and the inhospitable locations of their stations provided sufficient protection, or where relationships between groups were fundamentally nonviolent. This is speculation, of course. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Perhaps they fought and we simply haven't found the evidence. Perhaps their conflicts were ritualized in ways that left no archaeological trace. But it's worth considering that a civilization built around cosmic consciousness, around relationship with the sky, might have developed social structures radically different from what came after. Might have been, in some essential way, gentler, more cooperative, less driven by the hoarding and conquest instincts that seem to define so much of recorded history. And if that's true, their descent from the high places wasn't just a technological adaptation. It was a transformation of consciousness, a shift from cosmic to earthly, from expansive to territorial, from watching the infinite to grasping the finite. We inherited their tools, their metallurgical knowledge, their astronomical insights, but we lost their perspective, their way of being in the world. And maybe that loss is part of why we feel such unease now, such disconnection. We look at the stars and feel wonder, yes, but also separation. They're out there. We're down here. The cosmos is a place to study, to explore eventually, but not a relationship we live in daily. The sky miners lived in that relationship. They positioned themselves at the threshold between Earth and space, literally and metaphorically. They were intermediaries, translators, bridge people. When they came down, the bridge was abandoned. We're trying to build it again now with our rockets and satellites and space stations. But we're building with metal and fuel and mathematics, not with consciousness and relationship and patient watching. Both approaches have value. Both can lead upward. But they're different in essential ways. The ancient method required generations of accumulated observation, of knowledge passed down through bloodlines, of individual humans dedicating entire lives to watching and learning and teaching. It was slow, organic, deeply human. Our modern method is faster, more powerful, but also more alienating. We send robots to collect samples from asteroids. We process data through algorithms. The actual connection, the hands-on relationship with material from the sky, is mediated through layers of technology. We're efficient, but we're distant. Is there a synthesis possible? Can we reclaim something of the aerial miner's consciousness while wielding our modern capabilities? This is the question that matters, ultimately. Not just what they did, but what they understood, what they felt, what it meant to be human in that particular way, at that particular threshold. Because if we're going to become a spacefaring civilization, if we're going to mine asteroids, build orbital stations, eventually venture to other worlds, we'll need more than technology. We'll need the psychological and spiritual framework to make that transition without losing our humanity, without becoming pure instrumentality, all tool and no meaning. The sky miners had that framework. They proved it was possible to maintain human culture, human relationship, human meaning while engaging deeply with cosmic processes. They were our first space civilization, in a sense. Working with cruder tools, yes, limited by the gravity well they could never fully escape, but cosmic in their orientation, in their consciousness, in their understanding of where Earth fits in the larger pattern. And they left their structures behind as lessons, as possibilities, as proof that it can be done. When we finally establish permanent presence beyond Earth, when we build the orbital stations and asteroid mines and lunar bases that we keep promising ourselves, perhaps we'll look back at the high structures of the aerial miners and recognize them as the first attempt. The prototype, the proof of concept. Not technologically, no, but psychologically, culturally, spiritually. They showed that humans can orient themselves toward the sky, can build their lives around harvesting cosmic resources, can maintain that perspective across generations. They were our pioneers, our first ancestors to seriously attempt living as citizens of the cosmos, not just creatures of Earth. And if we're wise, we'll study not just their tools and techniques, but their mindset, their way of being, the consciousness that allowed them to spend cold nights at high altitude, watching patiently for the sky's gifts, understanding themselves as participants in processes larger than human timescales can contain. Let me tell you about a moment that happened just a few years ago, a convergence that the sky miners would have recognized immediately. October 2018. Scientists tracked an asteroid designated 2018 LA. Small, only a few meters across, but on a collision course with Earth. They had about 8 hours warning. The asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere over Botswana, Africa, in the early evening. It exploded at high altitude, fragmenting into hundreds of pieces that scattered across the desert. The fireball was visible for hundreds of miles. The sonic boom rattled windows. Within days, meteorite hunters from around the world converged on the predicted impact zone. They combed the Kalahari Desert, competing to find fragments of 2018 LA before wind and sand buried them. They found dozens of pieces, dark stones, fusion-crusted, carrying inside the minerals that hadn't existed on Earth's surface a week before. Material from the asteroid belt, from processes billions of years old. And here's what makes this moment significant. This was the first time in human history that we predicted an asteroid impact, watched it happen in real time, and then successfully recovered the fragments. The first time we closed the loop between astronomical observation and physical collection. The first time, in other words, that we did what the sky miners did, but with modern tools. 8 hours warning instead of the seasonal predictions and patient watching of the ancients. Computed trajectories instead of memorized patterns. Systematic search grids instead of knowledge of how wind and rain would distribute the fall. Different methods. Same goal. Same basic activity. Harvesting the sky. And those scientists and meteorite hunters converging on Botswana, whether they knew it or not, whether they'd ever heard of high-altitude aerial mining stations or meteoritic metalworking traditions, they were part of the same lineage. The same human impulse that drove our ancestors to build structures on impossible cliffs and forge tools from star metal. The knowledge was never fully lost. It went dormant, transformed, waited, and now it's awakening again in new forms with new capabilities. There are companies now with names like Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, planning asteroid mining operations. Most are still in early stages, facing enormous technical and financial challenges. But the intent is clear. The direction is set. We're going back to the sky for resources. Not because we've run out of Earth-based materials, not yet, though that's coming. But because we've recognized, as the ancient miners did, that the solar system contains vastly more accessible resources than our single planet. That the sky's wealth exceeds the Earth's by orders of magnitude. A single metal-rich asteroid, properly harvested, could contain more platinum group metals than have been mined in all of human history. The sky is still offering gifts. We're finally developing the means to accept them at scale. And when we do, when the first asteroid mining operation successfully returns material to Earth or processes it in orbit, we'll have completed a circuit that began thousands of years ago on cold mountain peaks with people watching meteor showers and forging tools from the fragments. The same circuit, expanded, amplified, but fundamentally the same relationship between humans and cosmic resources. This is what the high stations were teaching, if we learn to read them properly. Not just a historical curiosity. Not just an interesting episode in human technological development. They were a template, a proof of concept, a demonstration that humans can successfully orient their civilization around harvesting extraterrestrial resources. The scale was smaller, the methods were simpler, but the essential practice was there. And perhaps this is why those structures feel so compelling, why they draw archaeologists and mystics and seekers, why they resist simple explanation. They're not just ruins. They're prophecy. They're saying, this is what you were. This is what you will be again. This is the pattern of your relationship with the cosmos, temporarily forgotten, now being remembered. We are the descendants of sky miners. It's in our nature to look upward, to harvest what falls from heaven, to integrate cosmic materials into our tools and technologies. For a few thousand years, we got distracted. We focused on terrestrial concerns. We developed civilizations based entirely on earthbound resources. But that was an interlude, a pause. Not the full story of what humans are. The full story includes the high places, includes the watching, includes the patient work of collecting and processing what the universe offers. And we're returning to that story now. If you feel drawn to space exploration, to asteroid mining, to the vision of humanity expanding beyond Earth, recognize that you're not dreaming of something new. You're remembering something old. You're hearing the call that some of your ancestors answered thousands of years ago when they climbed to impossible heights and built their collection stations and forged their tools from meteoritic iron. The blood remembers even when the conscious mind doesn't. This is why space fascinates us. Why we spend billions on telescopes and rovers and satellites. Why we keep pushing toward a future among the stars despite the enormous challenges. Not because it's practical. Not because we need to. Not yet. But because it's what we are. What we've always been. Sky miners. Harvesters of cosmic materials. Bridge people between Earth and universe. The structures in the Andes and the Himalayas and the desert Southwest. They're our genetic memory made stone. Our deep past calling to our possible future. They say, you did this before. You can do it again. You will do it again. And they're right. The first permanent orbital stations are being planned now. Within decades, we'll have humans living and working in space continuously, not just visiting briefly but establishing presence. Those stations will be, in essence, the high-altitude mining platforms of the ancient world, rebuilt at a new elevation. Not mountain peaks but low Earth orbit. Not harvesting meteoritic fragments from the atmosphere but processing asteroids captured from deep space. Different scale. Same practice. And the people who crew those stations, who live in that environment, who do that work, they'll be the spiritual descendants of the aerial miners. Perhaps, in some cases, the literal genetic descendants, if bloodlines have truly preserved themselves as some esoteric traditions claim. They'll look down at Earth from their orbital platforms, seeing it as a small blue sphere against the infinite dark, and they'll understand what their ancestors understood standing on those high peaks watching the stars. That Earth is not separate from the cosmos. That the boundary between terrestrial and celestial is permeable, negotiable, something to be worked with rather than assumed as absolute. That humanity's place is at the threshold, the bridge, the connection point. This is our nature. This is our calling. The sky miners proved it was possible. We're proving it's inevitable. So here we are at a crossroads in the story. You've been patient following this thread through time and altitude, through evidence and speculation, through the spaces where archaeology meets mythology, and both point toward something stranger than either discipline can comfortably contain. Your breath has slowed. Perhaps your eyelids have grown heavy. Good. Let yourself settle into this contemplative space. We're entering the deeper layers now, where the questions become more personal, more immediate. Because this isn't just a story about ancient peoples and forgotten technologies. It's a story about intent, about purpose, about the reasons behind the reaching. Why did they do it? What drove human beings to climb to impossible heights, to endure cold and altitude sickness and constant danger, to dedicate generations to harvesting fragments from the sky? We've discussed practical answers. The metal was valuable, the technology gave them advantage, the resources were renewable. All true as far as it goes. But there's something deeper. Something that the structures themselves whisper, if you learn to listen. They were reaching, striving, attempting to close the distance between earth and sky, not just physically but ontologically. Trying to breach the boundary, to establish connection, to prove that humans could participate directly in cosmic processes rather than simply being subject to them. This is fundamentally different from worship. Different from the religious impulse that built temples and pyramids in later civilizations. The sky miners weren't supplicating to distant gods. They were asserting partnership, claiming a role in the exchange between heaven and earth. We give our attention, our observation, our labor. The sky gives its materials, its patterns, its gifts. This is relationship. This is dialogue. This is two parts of a larger system interacting, each necessary to the other. And perhaps this is the most unsettling implication of all. That the sky miners understood something about consciousness, about awareness, about the nature of the cosmos that we've lost. They didn't see the universe as dead matter governed by blind physical laws. They experienced it as a live, responsive participant. The sky wasn't just a place but an entity, and the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic process was direct, intimate, consequential. This worldview is alien to modern scientific materialism. We've spent centuries purging the universe of consciousness, reducing everything to mechanism and accident. And we've gained much from this approach: empirical knowledge, technological capability, the tools to manipulate matter at scales from quantum to cosmic. But we've lost something too: the sense of participation, of meaning embedded in the structure of reality itself, of human consciousness as intrinsically connected to cosmic consciousness rather than as an isolated accident in an indifferent void. The aerial miners lived in a different paradigm. Their entire civilization was organized around a relationship with something larger than human scale. And the structures they built weren't just functional, they were also symbolic, declarative, announcing to whatever might be listening: we are here, we are watching. We acknowledge the gift and we honor it with our attention and our craft. This is why the platforms face the sky. Why the doorways open to void rather than to shelter. Why the entire architecture seems designed as much for visibility from above as for habitability from within. They were making themselves known, positioning themselves at the threshold, saying, we are the bridge people. We translate between earth and heaven. This is our role, our purpose, our contribution to the larger pattern. And perhaps, here's where we venture into territory that archaeology cannot follow. Perhaps something noticed. Perhaps the relationship they sought wasn't one-sided. Perhaps their observation and harvest and craft were met with response, with acknowledgement, with a cosmic yes that validated their effort and sustained their dedication across millennia. We have no way to prove this. No empirical method for detecting cosmic consciousness or measuring the flow of meaning between human observation and universal process. Science rightly remains skeptical of such claims. But the persistence of the practice suggests something. The way it spread across continents, appeared in isolated cultures, maintained itself through ice ages and climate catastrophes and all the pressures that should have extinguished such a difficult, specialized way of life. Something kept it alive. Something made it worth continuing. Perhaps it was purely human cultural momentum, the weight of tradition, the status accrued by those who maintained the old ways. All valid explanations. Or perhaps the sky miners were receiving something we can no longer detect. Something that made the effort worthwhile not just materially but spiritually, psychologically, ontologically. Perhaps standing on those high platforms, watching meteor showers blaze across the night, holding tools forged from star metal that had traveled billions of miles to reach human hands. Perhaps in those moments they felt something we've forgotten how to feel. Connection, recognition, the direct, unmediated experience of participating in cosmic story. And perhaps that experience was the real harvest. The metal was the medium, the concrete expression of relationship, but the experience itself was the treasure. The knowing that humans could reach across the void and touch what came from beyond, could integrate cosmic materials into earthly forms, could prove through craft and dedication that the separation between terrestrial and celestial was permeable, negotiable, crossable. This is what we've lost. This is what we're trying to recover with our space programs and satellite networks and asteroid mining plans. Not just resources, not just technological capability, but the sense of participation, the feeling of being actors in cosmic drama rather than isolated observers of a meaningless mechanism. We want to touch the sky again, to harvest its gifts, to prove that we belong not just on Earth but in the larger universe. The aerial miners knew how. They left the instructions carved in stone, encoded in alignments, preserved in the shape and position of their impossible structures. And the core instruction, the essential teaching, is this: reach. Build your platforms at the threshold. Watch with intention. Harvest with reverence. Forge what falls from heaven into tools for earthly use. And in doing so, close the circuit. Become the bridge. Participate. This is not religion. It's not science. It's something older than both, something that might encompass both if we could recover the full paradigm. It's a way of being human that takes the cosmic context seriously, that positions consciousness itself as part of the process, not separate from it, that treats the universe as something we're in conversation with, not just subject to. There's a curious phenomenon reported by modern astronomers and astronauts, something they call the overview effect. It happens when humans see Earth from space, that moment when the planet appears as a small, fragile sphere against the infinite dark, when national borders and human conflicts vanish into irrelevance, when the unity and vulnerability of our world becomes viscerally, undeniably real. Those who experience it describe a permanent shift in consciousness, a recognition that we're all crew members on a single vessel, that the cosmos is our context, that the divisions we fight over are arbitrary compared to the vast forces that shape our existence. The sky miners didn't need to leave Earth to experience this shift. They achieved it through a different route, by positioning themselves at altitude, by orienting their entire way of life around celestial observation, by working daily with materials that had traveled through the cosmos to reach their hands. They lived with the overview effect as their permanent condition. And perhaps this is why their structures feel so powerful, so numinous, even today when they're empty and their builders are long gone. They were built by people who had transcended ordinary human consciousness, who lived in expanded awareness, who understood their place in the cosmic pattern with a clarity most of us never achieve. Walking through those ruins, standing on those platforms, you're not just seeing old construction. You're encountering the architecture of transcendent consciousness. Physical structures built to facilitate and express a way of being that most modern humans can barely imagine. This is not mysticism. Or rather, it's mysticism that was also eminently practical, productive, functional. A spirituality that harvested actual resources, created actual tools, maintained actual populations through actual work. The separation between practical and spiritual, between material and transcendent, between earthly and cosmic, these dichotomies didn't exist for them. Or rather, they existed as a tension to be bridged, a gap to be closed through deliberate practice and careful craft. The meteoritic tools weren't religious objects or practical implements. They were both, simultaneously, unified. This is what we've lost in our modern compartmentalization. We've separated science from meaning, technology from consciousness, practical utility from spiritual significance. And in doing so, we've created a fragmented world, a fractured understanding, a way of being that leaves us feeling disconnected from the larger pattern despite having more knowledge and capability than any previous civilization. The aerial miners were integrated. whole. Their technology and their spirituality were one thing, expressed through the same activities, working toward the same understanding. And maybe this integration is what we need to recover if we're going to become a truly spacefaring civilization. Not just the technical capability to mine asteroids and build orbital stations, but the consciousness that allows us to do so without losing ourselves in the process. Because there's a danger in the path we're currently on. A risk that our expansion into space will be purely extractive, purely instrumental, driven by economic motives and national competition rather than by any deeper sense of participation in cosmic story. We could mine the asteroid belt without ever developing the consciousness that the aerial miners had. We could harvest cosmic resources while remaining psychologically and spiritually earthbound, bringing all our worst qualities with us into the void. This would be tragedy. Not because it would fail, it might succeed brilliantly in narrow terms, but because it would be a diminished success. A lesser achievement than what the ancient sky miners accomplished with their crude tools and impossible structures. They reached toward the sky and became something larger in the process. They expanded not just their technological capabilities but their consciousness, their understanding, their sense of self and place. Can we do the same? Can we recover that integration, that wholeness, that ability to treat cosmic engagement as simultaneously practical and transcendent? The answer isn't certain, but the structures stand as proof that it's possible. That humans can achieve this expanded way of being. That we've done it before and can do it again. And perhaps that's their ultimate gift to us. Not the metallurgical techniques or astronomical alignments, valuable as those are, but the demonstration that integrated cosmic consciousness is achievable. That we can be both practical and transcendent. That we can harvest the sky without losing the sense of wonder that makes the harvest meaningful. If you're still with me, if you're feeling this pull toward something larger, something that integrates rather than fragments, then you understand. Then you're ready for the next phase of this human story. Because we're at a threshold now. The old ways of being human, earthbound, fragmented, separate from cosmic context, those ways are ending. Not through catastrophe but through emergence. Through the slow, inevitable expansion of consciousness that happens when a species starts to remember what it once knew. The aerial miners were our first attempt at cosmic consciousness. They built their high stations and forged their star tools and maintained their watch across millennia. And then the practice diminished, went dormant, waited. But it never died. Couldn't die because it's written into what humans are. Into our DNA if you believe some researchers. Into our collective unconscious if you follow Jung. Into the morphic fields that shape behavior if you trust Sheldrake. However you explain it, the pattern persists. The impulse returns. The calling to harvest the sky, to bridge Earth and cosmos, to participate rather than merely observe. We're answering that call now. Clumsily, yes. Partially, certainly. With much still to learn and remember. But we're answering. We're building our new platforms, our orbital stations, our collection systems. We're forging new tools from cosmic materials, not with hammer and anvil now, but with 3D printers and nanofabrication and techniques the ancient miners couldn't have imagined. Yet the essential act is the same. We're reaching, bridging, participating. And if we're wise, if we learn from what the high stations teach, we'll do more than recreate their technology. We'll recover their consciousness, their integration, their way of being human that treats cosmic engagement as both work and worship, both practical and sacred, both technique and transcendence. This is the future calling. Not just asteroid mining and orbital habitats, but the recovery of integrated cosmic consciousness, the return to wholeness, the remembering of what it means to be human in the full sense, earthly and cosmic, material and transcendent, creatures of soil who work with stars. The aerial miners showed us it's possible, proved it can be sustained across generations, left their structures standing as invitation and instruction. Now it's our turn, our generation and the ones immediately following. We're the ones who'll determine whether humanity's return to the sky is merely technical or also transcendent. Whether we diminish or expand, fragment or integrate, lose ourselves in extraction or find ourselves in participation. The choice isn't made yet. The future is still open. But the high stations are calling, have always been calling. We'll continue calling until we finally understand what they're saying. Reach, bridge, participate, remember what you are. There's an artifact I haven't mentioned yet. A small thing, easily overlooked among the more dramatic evidence of high-altitude structures and meteoritic metalworking. But it carries implications that ripple through everything we've discussed. In a museum in La Paz, Bolivia, stored in a climate-controlled case that few visitors ever examine closely, sits a fragment of worked metal, about the size of a human palm. Meteoritic iron-nickel alloy, confirmed through spectroscopic analysis, but with curious features that don't match standard tool forms. It has holes, precisely drilled holes, spaced in a pattern that seems deliberate, and along one edge, a series of notches, regular intervals like measurement marks. The conventional interpretation, a decorative object, perhaps ceremonial. The holes might have held inlays of other materials now lost. The notches are abstract patterning. But there's another possibility, one that makes materials scientists uncomfortable when they allow themselves to consider it seriously. The holes and notches form a pattern, a mathematical pattern. Specifically, they correspond to the relative positions of stars in a particular constellation, Pleiades, as seen from Earth during the late Pleistocene, roughly 15,000 years ago. Not as they appear now. As they appeared then, before precession shifted the positions, before the proper motion of individual stars altered the configuration. Someone mapped the Pleiades in meteoritic metal, with precision that requires long-term observation and mathematical sophistication. 15,000 years ago, or someone later copied a much older original, preserving knowledge that had been passed down from that earlier period. Either way, the implications are staggering. The aerial miners weren't just collecting meteorites. They were mapping the cosmos from which those meteorites came. They were tracking stellar positions with accuracy that we didn't achieve again until the era of precision telescopes. And they were encoding that knowledge in durable form, in materials that could survive millennia, in objects that could be passed down through generations even if the meaning was temporarily lost. They were building an archive, a library written in metal and stone, distributed across high-altitude sites around the world, waiting for descendants who would eventually develop the tools to read what had been preserved. This changes the story, changes it fundamentally, because if the high stations were also observatories, if the meteoritic metalworking was also data storage, if the entire practice was as much about preserving knowledge as about harvesting resources, then the aerial miners were doing something far more sophisticated than we've imagined. They were creating redundancy, backup systems, ensuring that even if catastrophe struck, even if the centers of learning were destroyed and populations scattered, the essential knowledge would survive. Encoded in structures too massive to be easily destroyed, preserved in metal too durable to corrode quickly, distributed across enough sites that complete loss would be nearly impossible. This is not the behavior of primitive people opportunistically collecting sky metal. This is the behavior of a civilization that understood the fragility of knowledge, that had perhaps already experienced loss, that was determined to preserve what they understood for whoever might come after. What were they preserving? What did they know that was worth such effort? The stellar maps suggest astronomical knowledge at a level that shouldn't have existed in the periods we're discussing. The metallurgical sophistication suggests material science far beyond what conventional timelines allow. The architectural achievements suggest engineering capabilities that we struggle to replicate even with modern technology. But perhaps most importantly, the very act of creating these preservation systems suggests an understanding of deep time, of cycles of rise and fall, of the inevitability of forgetting and the importance of creating systems that could trigger remembering when the time was right. They knew civilization was fragile. They'd seen it fail, perhaps. Or they'd inherited stories of previous failures, previous falls, previous forgettings. And they responded not with despair but with determination. They built their high stations not just as functional facilities but as time capsules, as messages to the future, as gifts to descendants who would eventually climb high enough, develop sophisticated enough analytical tools, ask the right questions. They were speaking to us, across millennia, through stone and metal and the precise placement of structures that align with celestial events. And we're finally, just now, in our current era, developing the capacity to hear them. The satellite surveys that reveal structures invisible from ground level. The spectroscopic analyses that confirm meteoritic origins and reveal isotope ratios. The computer modeling that detects astronomical alignments too precise to be accidental. The carbon dating and stratigraphy that push the timelines deeper and deeper into the past. All of these modern techniques are, in effect, decryption tools. Methods for reading the message that was encoded thousands of years ago by people who understood that direct transmission of knowledge is impossible across such spans, but indirect transmission, through durable artifacts, through architectural encoding, through patterns that would eventually be recognizable to sufficiently advanced observers, indirect transmission could work. Could bridge the gap. Could trigger remembering in distant descendants. And it's working. The message is being received. Slowly, partially, with much still obscured and controversial. But received nonetheless. We're learning that our ancestors were not primitive. That sophisticated knowledge and capability have existed before. That what we think of as the linear march of progress from stone tools to space stations is actually something more complex. A cycle, perhaps, or a spiral, where themes repeat at different scales, where capabilities are lost and recovered, where forgetting and remembering alternate. And if that's true, if human history is cyclical rather than linear, then we're not at the beginning of the space age. We're at a return, a recovery, a remembering of something that was attempted before, that succeeded to some degree, that left traces for us to find. The aerial miners were the first space program, operating with different tools, yes, limited by gravitational constraints they couldn't overcome, but space-oriented nonetheless, cosmic in their focus, dedicated to harvesting extraterrestrial resources and integrating them into human civilization. They failed in the sense that their practice diminished and their stations were abandoned. But they succeeded in the deeper sense. They preserved the knowledge. They left the maps. They created the redundant systems that would allow descendants to rediscover, to decode, to remember. And now we're remembering. Now the code is breaking. Now the message is clear enough that we can begin to act on it. So what do we do with this knowledge? What changes when we understand that we're not pioneers but inheritors, not inventors but remembers? First, it should make us humble. We modern humans carry so much arrogance about our uniqueness, our special place in history as the first technological civilization. We look at ancient peoples with condescension, assuming they were primitive, limited, fumbling toward understanding that we've now achieved. But the evidence from the high stations suggests otherwise. Suggests that sophisticated knowledge and capability have existed before, that we're not necessarily superior to our ancestors, just different, operating at a different scale with different tools but not necessarily greater wisdom or deeper understanding. This humility is important. It protects us from the hubris that has destroyed previous civilizations, the assumption that we've transcended limits, that we can exploit without consequence, that our power places us beyond the patterns that constrain lesser peoples. The aerial miners understood limits. They worked within the constraints of gravity and atmosphere and the finite supply of fallen meteorites. They harvested sustainably, never depleting their sources, maintaining their practice across millennia because they never took more than the sky offered. Can we learn that restraint? Can we approach asteroid mining and orbital resource extraction with the same consciousness of limits, the same respect for cycles and sustainability? Or will we strip mine the solar system the way we've strip mined Earth, leaving scars and depletion in our wake? The high stations offer a different model, a way of being technological that doesn't require domination and exhaustion, that can persist across deep time because it works with natural cycles rather than against them. This is the second lesson, integration with cosmic processes rather than conquest of them. The aerial miners didn't try to control meteor showers or redirect celestial bodies. They watched. They learned the patterns. They positioned themselves optimally to receive what naturally fell. They worked with the cosmos rather than trying to dominate it. Our current approach to space is more aggressive. We talk about conquering space, about mastering zero gravity, about claiming asteroids and planets. The language is martial, dominating, extractive. But what if we approached it differently? What if we thought of ourselves as participants in cosmic processes rather than conquerors of cosmic resources? This isn't just philosophical. It has practical implications for how we design our systems, how we conduct our operations, how we relate to what we find beyond Earth. A participatory approach would emphasize observation over intervention, would seek to understand natural patterns before disrupting them, would harvest in ways that maintain rather than destroy, that leave systems capable of continuing rather than exhausting them. The aerial miners practiced this approach for thousands of years, and they succeeded in maintaining their civilization across spans of time that make our few centuries of industrialization look like a moment. Could we achieve that kind of sustainability, that longevity? Not if we continue with our current extractive mindset. Not if we treat space as an empty frontier to be conquered and consumed. But if we learn from the high stations, if we recover something of the consciousness that built them, then maybe. Then perhaps we could establish a human presence in space that persists not for decades or centuries but for millennia. This is the third lesson, thinking in deep time. The aerial miners built for permanence. Their structures were positioned to last. Their knowledge encoding systems were designed to survive across periods that would see languages change, cultures rise and fall, entire ways of life transform. They were thinking in spans that we barely comprehend, planning for descendants hundreds of generations distant, creating systems that wouldn't fail even if immediate successors didn't fully understand them. This is radically different from our modern approach. We build for quarterly profits, for election cycles, for the span of individual careers. Our time horizon is short. Our structures are designed for decades at most, not millennia. But space demands deep time thinking. The scales involved, the distances, the energies, the slow accumulation of resources, these things can't be rushed. Can't be accomplished in short-term bursts driven by immediate profit or political expedience. If we're serious about becoming a spacefaring civilization, we need to recover the ability to think and plan and build across deep time, to create systems that will persist when we're gone, to encode knowledge in ways that will survive our own forgetting. The aerial miners showed us how. Their high stations still stand. Their messages are still being decoded. Their knowledge is still accessible to those who learn to read it. We could do the same. Should do the same if we want our ventures into space to be more than brief expeditions followed by retreat and forgetting. Build for permanence. Encode redundantly. Distribute widely. Think in millennia, not quarters. This is how you establish presence that persists. This is how you ensure that the investment of resources and effort and human life isn't wasted when attention shifts or budgets shrink or political will falters. And there's a fourth lesson, perhaps the most important. Maintain the connection between material practice and expanded consciousness. The aerial miners didn't separate their technology from their spirituality. The harvesting of meteorites was a practical activity that had economic value, yes. But it was also a spiritual practice that maintained cosmic consciousness, that kept them aware of their place in the larger pattern. We've lost this integration. Our technology is purely instrumental. Our spirituality, such as it is divorced from practical activity. We've created a split that leaves us materially powerful but spiritually impoverished. But we could heal that split, could recover the integration that the aerial miners achieved. Not by abandoning science or reason, not by retreating into superstition or unfounded belief, but by recognizing that consciousness is part of the cosmos too, that meaning and purpose and transcendent experience are as real as matter and energy, that a complete understanding of reality includes both the objective measurements of science and the subjective experience of awareness. The aerial miners lived in this integrated understanding. Their technology emerged from and supported their spirituality. Their spirituality grounded and directed their technology. This made them whole, prevented the fragmentation that plagues modern civilization. And it could make us whole too, if we're willing to learn. Willing to see the high stations not just as archaeological curiosities but as active teachings, still relevant, still offering guidance for the challenges we face. This is what the structures are calling us toward. Humility, integration with cosmic processes, deep time thinking, and the unity of material practice with expanded consciousness. Not easy lessons. Not comfortable ones, for a civilization built on different principles. But necessary ones, if we want to succeed where the aerial miners eventually diminished. If we want to take what they began and carry it forward, out of Earth's gravity well into the larger cosmos. If we want to become, truly and permanently, what they showed us humans could be, sky miners. Bridge people. Participants in cosmic story. Let's talk about intent. That word has been hovering at the edges of this narrative, never quite addressed directly. The mystery that archaeology can document but never fully explain. Why? Why build at impossible altitudes? Why dedicate generations to watching and harvesting? Why persist in a practice so difficult, so dangerous, so demanding? The material answers we've discussed, technological advantage, renewable resources, practical benefits, these explain the how but not the why. They describe mechanism but not motivation. What drove them? What kept them returning to those high places year after year, generation after generation, for thousands of years? We can't ask them. The builders are gone. Their language is lost. Their writings, if they had any, haven't survived or haven't been found or can't yet be read. But the structures speak. Not in words, but in choices. In the specific ways they were built and where and how they were oriented. And what they seem to say, what pattern emerges when you look at enough of these sites, is this: they were trying to establish permanent connection. To create a bridge that wouldn't fall when individuals died or communities migrated. To institutionalize the relationship between human consciousness and cosmic process. This wasn't personal mysticism. Wasn't individual shamans having occasional visions. This was collective, systematic, architectural. This was civilization-scale effort to maintain continuous contact. With what? That's the question that makes materialist archaeologists uncomfortable. The easy answer is with nothing. It was illusion, superstition, waste of effort directed at imaginary entities or forces. But the persistence argues otherwise. The sophistication argues otherwise. The measurable achievements in metallurgy and astronomy argue otherwise. You don't maintain a practice across millennia, through ice ages and climate catastrophes, if it's producing nothing. If it's pure delusion with no feedback, no validation, no something that makes the effort worthwhile. They were getting something, receiving something, experiencing something that justified the cost. Perhaps it was purely psychological. The sense of purpose, the meaning derived from participating in a practice larger than individual lives. The community cohesion created by shared ritual and common purpose. These are valuable and they do sustain cultures across long spans. But perhaps it was more. Perhaps the relationship they were establishing wasn't metaphorical. Perhaps their observation and harvest and craft were creating actual connection to actual something. Not supernatural. Not divine intervention or miracles or violations of physical law, but something within natural law that we don't yet understand. Some aspect of consciousness or coherence or quantum entanglement at macro scales. Some field effect where sufficiently organized observation influences what's observed. This sounds like quantum mysticism, like the worst kind of pseudoscience that invokes physics concepts without understanding them. But quantum physics itself suggests that observation affects reality, that the act of measuring influences what's measured, that consciousness and matter interact in ways classical physics never predicted. What if the aerial miners, through generations of careful observation, developed practical techniques for leveraging this interaction? Not through theoretical understanding, they didn't have the mathematical framework we use, but through empirical practice. Through trial and refinement across centuries. What if their watching wasn't passive but active? What if their consciousness, properly trained and focused, actually influenced what fell from the sky? Made certain trajectories more likely, certain impacts more probable? This is speculation. Wild speculation, impossible to prove with current tools. But it explains the precision of their predictions. The way they seem to know not just when but where meteorites would fall. The success rate that statistical analysis suggests was too high to be purely chance. Perhaps they weren't just observing and harvesting. Perhaps they were, in some subtle way, calling, inviting, creating conditions that made certain outcomes more probable. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson of all, the one that's hardest to accept but most transformative if true. Consciousness is not separate from physical reality. Awareness is not a passive witness but an active participant. Mind and matter are two aspects of a unified process, and sufficiently refined consciousness can influence material outcomes. The aerial miners might have understood this, might have built their entire practice around it. The high altitude, the architectural precision, the astronomical alignments, the metallurgical rituals. All of it creating conditions for consciousness to interact maximally with cosmic processes. This is why the structures face the sky, why the platforms are open and exposed, why the entire design seems to facilitate watching, observing, paying attention. Because attention itself was the tool. Consciousness was the technology. Everything else, the meteoritic metal, the astronomical tracking, the mathematical precision, was in service of focusing and refining and maintaining collective awareness at levels that could actually influence probability at cosmic scales. If this seems impossible, remember, we don't understand consciousness. We barely understand attention. We have sophisticated physics that describes matter and energy, but no physics of awareness, no mathematics of meaning, no science of subjective experience. The gap in our knowledge is enormous. And into that gap, possibilities exist that our current paradigm can't accommodate. Perhaps the aerial miners had knowledge we've lost. Not primitive superstition, but sophisticated understanding of consciousness-matter interaction. Empirical techniques that worked even without theoretical framework. Practical methods for doing what we'd now call manifesting, or probability manipulation, or intention amplification. Call it what you will. The point is, maybe they had reasons for their practice that were completely valid, completely practical, completely reproducible, but outside our current scientific framework. And maybe their structures were designed to teach these techniques to whoever came after, to preserve not just the material practices but the consciousness technologies. To wait until descendants developed sufficient sophistication to recognize what was being offered. We're not there yet. We can measure the structures, date the artifacts, analyze the metals. But we can't fully replicate the practice. Can't fully understand the intent. But we're getting closer. Quantum biology is discovering coherence effects in living systems. Consciousness studies are finding measurable impacts of meditation and intention. Material science is revealing properties of meteoritic metals that enhance certain biological processes. The pieces are assembling. The picture is clarifying. And what's emerging looks surprisingly like validation of what the aerial miners were attempting. Not exact correspondence, no. Our framework is different, our language is different. But the core insight that consciousness and matter interact, that awareness can influence probability, that collective intention focused through appropriate structures can produce measurable effects. This insight is being recovered. The high stations were laboratories, experimental facilities for consciousness research, built to scales and timespans that make our university departments look trivial. And they worked. For thousands of years, they produced results that sustained the practice and spread the techniques across continents. Then something changed. The connection weakened. The techniques stopped working as reliably, and gradually the practice was abandoned. Why? What changed? Perhaps the cosmic conditions shifted. Perhaps the Earth's position in some larger cycle altered, making the connection harder to maintain. Perhaps the consciousness of humanity changed as populations grew and valley civilizations emerged, making the focused awareness required for the practice more difficult to achieve. Or perhaps the knowledge was deliberately withdrawn, hidden by those who saw danger in such capabilities, who feared what humans might do with the power to influence cosmic outcomes. We don't know, can't know with current evidence, but the structures remain. The invitation stands. The techniques, if they can be recovered, wait for minds ready to attempt them again. And here we arrive at the present moment. At you listening to these words. At the question that matters most. What does this mean for you? Not for humanity in general. Not for civilization or species or grand historical arcs. But for you specifically. The individual consciousness receiving this information right now. What changes when you understand that the high stations exist, that the sky miners were real, that sophisticated knowledge and practice existed long before conventional history acknowledges. First, it should expand your sense of human possibility. You're heir to more than you've been taught. Your ancestors accomplished things that official narratives dismiss or ignore. Capabilities existed before. Knowledge was achieved. Practices were refined. This means humans, people like you, with the same basic biology, the same fundamental consciousness, have already done remarkable things. Have already reached toward the cosmos and succeeded in establishing connection. If they could do it, so can you. Not in the same way necessarily. You don't need to climb to high altitude and forge meteoritic metal, unless that calls to you strongly. But the underlying capacity they demonstrated, the ability to expand consciousness, to participate in cosmic processes, to integrate material practice with transcendent awareness, that capacity is yours too. It's part of human inheritance, written into what you are. Second, it should make you question what you've been told about reality, about history, about what's possible. The conventional narratives serve certain purposes. They create continuity, provide simple explanations, make the past comprehensible in comfortable terms. But they're incomplete, sometimes deliberately so. There are always anomalies, outliers, evidence that doesn't fit the standard story. The high stations are such evidence. The meteoritic metalworking is such evidence. The astronomical precision is such evidence. And if the standard story is wrong about this, what else might it be wrong about? What other capabilities, other knowledge, other ways of being human have been dismissed or forgotten or deliberately obscured? Your willingness to question, to look at evidence directly rather than through the filter of official interpretation, to consider possibilities outside the standard framework. This willingness is itself a kind of awakening. A remembering, a reclaiming of your capacity to evaluate reality independently. Third, it should inspire you to look up. Literally and metaphorically. The aerial miners' greatest achievement wasn't the tools they forged or the structures they built. It was the consciousness they maintained, the cosmic awareness, the sense of connection to processes larger than human scale, the understanding of Earth's place in the universe. This consciousness is available to you, right now. Tonight, if you go outside and look at the stars with attention, with presence, with willingness to feel your connection to what you're seeing. You don't need high altitude, don't need specialized training, don't need to harvest meteorites. You just need to look, really look. Let yourself feel the fact that those distant lights are suns, are stellar furnaces where the elements in your body were forged. Let yourself comprehend that the darkness between them is distance so vast it defies imagination. Yet you're connected to all of it through the matter you're made of, through the laws that govern both your atoms and those distant stars. This simple act of looking with awareness, with recognition of connection, this is the beginning of cosmic consciousness. This is what the aerial miners cultivated and refined. This is the capacity they proved humans can develop and maintain. And it's yours, waiting, accessible. Fourth, it should make you reconsider your relationship with technology. The aerial miners had technology, yes. Sophisticated metallurgical technology, impressive astronomical technology, architectural technology that we struggle to replicate. But their technology emerged from and supported consciousness development. It was tool in service of awareness, not replacement for it. We moderns have inverted this relationship. Our technology dominates. Our consciousness atrophies. We use devices that think for us, remember for us, observe for us. And in doing so, we diminish our own capacities. The aerial miners would find this baffling. Why would you create tools that make you less capable, less aware, less conscious? Technology should amplify human capacity, not replace it. Should extend awareness, not substitute for it. Should enable deeper engagement with reality, not provide escape from it. If you take nothing else from this story, take this, reclaim your consciousness. Use technology as tool, not as master. Maintain your capacity for direct observation, for independent thought, for awareness that isn't mediated through screens and algorithms. Look at the sky directly, not through apps that identify constellations for you. Think through problems yourself, not by outsourcing to AI. Pay attention with your own awareness, not by recording everything for later review. This is what it means to honor the legacy of the sky miners, to maintain the capacities they proved humans possess, to be fully present, fully conscious, fully engaged with reality. And fifth, this might be most important, it should give you permission to reach. You're allowed to want more, to dream of expanded capabilities, deeper understanding, cosmic connection, to orient your life around questions larger than immediate comfort or conventional success. You're allowed to build your own high station, whatever form that takes, to establish practices that maintain cosmic awareness, to dedicate yourself to something that won't pay off in your lifetime but might echo across generations. The aerial miners gave thousands of years to their practice. Generations of individuals who lived and died in service of something larger than themselves. And they succeeded in creating something that persists, that teaches, that calls across millennia. You can do this too, in your own way, at your own scale. Maybe it's a research project that won't be completed in your lifetime. Maybe it's a creative work that expresses cosmic understanding. Maybe it's a practice of observation and documentation that future generations can build on. Maybe it's raising children with cosmic consciousness, ensuring the understanding continues. Whatever form it takes, you're allowed to dedicate yourself to it, to let it be the organizing principle of your life, to choose meaning over comfort, contribution over consumption, legacy over immediate gratification. The aerial miners proved this is a valid way to be human, a good way, a way that produces lasting value and genuine achievement. And their structures stand as permission, as invitation, as evidence that such dedication is possible and worthwhile. So when you feel that pull toward the stars, toward deeper understanding, toward participation in something larger, don't dismiss it as impractical or unrealistic or foolish. It's your inheritance calling, your capacity recognizing itself. The same impulse that built those impossible structures at impossible altitudes, attempting impossible connection. Is what you are, what humans are, what we've always been, beneath the overlay of conventional civilization. Sky miners, bridge people, consciousness reaching toward cosmos. The high stations wait, the invitation stands. What will you build? What will you reach toward? What connection will you attempt to establish? The answer is yours to discover. But the possibility is real, proven, achievable. The aerial miners showed us the way. So let your breath deepen now. Let the weight of your body settle into whatever surface supports it. You've traveled far in this listening, climbed impossible heights in imagination, held star metal in your mind's hand. The story has unfolded across thousands of years and multiple continents, through evidence and speculation, through what can be proven and what can only be intuited. And we arrive, finally, at the question of what becomes of knowledge once it's received. What you do with this information, how it lives in you or doesn't, because that's the real mystery, isn't it? Not what the aerial miners did in their time, but what their story does in ours. How it propagates forward. Whether it triggers remembering or remains just interesting content, briefly considered then forgotten. The high stations were built to trigger remembering, to create conditions where descendants would encounter evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed, to force questions that conventional narratives couldn't adequately answer. And they're succeeding, slowly, across academic disciplines and consciousness movements, through archaeology and spirituality, in scientific journals and mystical experiences. The remembering is happening. The knowledge is returning. The consciousness the aerial miners cultivated is re-emerging in modern forms. You're part of this process now. Whether you chose to be or stumbled into it, whether you believe everything suggested here or remain skeptical, you've engaged with the material. The ideas have entered your awareness. And once known, they can't be fully unknown. Something has shifted. Some possibility has opened. Some question has been planted that conventional answers won't satisfy. This is how remembering works. Not as sudden revelation but as gradual recognition. As pieces assembling into patterns. As evidence accumulating until the old explanations collapse under their own inadequacy. You don't need to believe anything specific. Don't need to accept every speculation or interpretive leap. Healthy skepticism is good. Demanding evidence is appropriate. But remain open to the possibility that official history is incomplete. That human capabilities are larger than we've been taught. That consciousness and cosmos interact in ways we're only beginning to understand. Remain open to your own experience, to what you feel when you look at stars, to the sense of connection that arises unbidden sometimes, linking you to vast processes and ancient patterns. Remain open to the calling if you feel it, the pull toward high places, toward cosmic engagement, toward participation in something larger than individual life. This calling is real. It's not pathology or escapism or delusion. It's recognition. Your consciousness identifying its larger context. Your awareness remembering what it's capable of. The aerial miners heard this calling, answered it, built their entire civilization around it, and succeeded in creating something that endured across millennia, that speaks still to those who learn to listen. You can answer too, in your own way, with your own tools, at your own scale. Maybe that means literally going to high places, mountains, observatories, places where the sky feels close and vast, where you can watch meteor showers with the attention of an ancient harvester, seeing in each bright streak not just burning debris but connection, gift, reminder of cosmic context. Maybe it means engaging with astronomy or aerospace, contributing in some practical way to humanity's return to space. Helping build the new aerial mining operations, the asteroid harvesters, the orbital refineries, the collection stations that will operate beyond atmosphere. Maybe it means consciousness work, meditation, contemplation, practices that maintain cosmic awareness in daily life, that keep you connected to the larger pattern even while engaging with immediate concerns. Maybe it means creative expression, art, music, writing, ways of encoding and transmitting the understanding for others to encounter. Becoming a node in the knowledge transmission network, the way the high stations were nodes in the ancient system. Or maybe it means something entirely unique to you. Some application of these principles that only your specific combination of interests and capabilities could generate. Some way of being a bridge person that hasn't existed before. However it manifests, trust it. Trust that the calling is valid, the intuition is real, the sense of purpose is genuine. Because the aerial miners are calling across time. Not literally, they're dead, dissolved, returned to cosmic elements. But their work calls. Their structures call. The pattern they established calls to similar patterns in present consciousness. Like calls to like. Consciousness recognizes consciousness. Purpose identifies purpose. And if you feel it, that sense that this story matters, that these ancient people understood something important, that their practice holds keys to challenges we're facing, then you're hearing the call. You're being invited to remember, to reclaim, to participate in the continuation of something that began thousands of years ago and isn't finished yet. The story of humanity's relationship with the cosmos. Our ongoing attempt to establish connection, to participate consciously, to be more than passive recipients of natural processes but active partners in cosmic unfolding. This story is still being written. The aerial miners wrote their chapter. We're writing ours now. And you, yes, you, the specific consciousness attending to these words, you're part of the authorship. Whether you write a footnote or a major section, whether your contribution is large or small, public or private, you matter to the story. Your choice to engage or dismiss, to remember or forget, to answer the calling or ignore it, these choices shape what happens next. Not deterministically. You're not burdened with some grand destiny or cosmic mission. You can absolutely choose to set this aside, to return to conventional life, to treat this as interesting entertainment with no practical implications. That's legitimate. That's fine. Not everyone needs to be an aerial miner. Not every human is called to cosmic consciousness work. But if you do feel called, if something in this story resonates, if the vision of humans harvesting the sky and bridging Earth and cosmos strikes you as true and important and necessary, then know that your feeling is valid. Know that people before you felt this way and acted on it and succeeded in creating something lasting and meaningful. Know that you're not alone in this. That others in this moment are hearing the same calling, responding in their own ways, contributing to the same larger pattern. Know that the structures stand waiting. The high stations, abandoned but not destroyed, diminished but not erased, ready to teach anyone who climbs high enough, who looks carefully enough, who asks the right questions. The invitation is open. The knowledge is available. The practice can be recovered. What you do with this knowing is your choice, your contribution to the ongoing story. But the aerial miners have shown it's possible, have proved that humans can achieve cosmic consciousness, can maintain it across generations, can build civilizations around it. And they've left their structures as evidence, as inspiration, as instruction. The rest is up to us, up to you. There's one more thing to address before we part. Something we've circled around but haven't directly confronted. The question that makes this entire narrative uncomfortable for both skeptics and believers. What if they return? Not the aerial miners themselves. They're gone. Their bloodlines dispersed or ended. Their languages lost. Their identities dissolved into the populations that absorbed them when they descended from the high places. But what if the practice returns? What if humans once again establish high-altitude stations dedicated to harvesting the sky? What if we, or our children, or their children, rebuild those bridges, reopen those connections, restore what was abandoned? It's not impossible, not even improbable, given current trajectory. We're already mining asteroids in planning stages, already building orbital platforms, already developing technologies for processing extraterrestrial materials. We're already, in other words, becoming aerial miners again, just at a different altitude, with different tools, but fundamentally the same practice, harvesting cosmic resources, integrating them into human civilization. And if we do this, when we do this, what happens to the consciousness component? Do we recover that too? Or do we remain psychologically earthbound while physically expanding into space? This is the critical question, the one that determines whether we repeat the ancient pattern completely or only partially. Because the aerial miners weren't just technologists. They were consciousness explorers. Their metallurgical expertise was matched by their cosmological understanding. Their practical capabilities emerged from and supported their transcendent awareness. Can we achieve that integration again? Can our orbital miners be cosmic mystics too? Can our asteroid harvesters maintain the awareness that makes the harvest meaningful rather than merely profitable? It's possible, but not guaranteed, not automatic. We could easily develop a space industry that's purely extractive, that treats asteroids as or deposits to be mined out and abandoned, that brings the worst of earthly capitalism into the cosmos, exploitation, inequality, environmental destruction at solar system scale. This would be tragedy, not just morally but practically, because it wouldn't last, wouldn't be sustainable, wouldn't create the foundation for genuine, lasting human presence beyond Earth. The aerial miners understood this. Their practice was sustainable precisely because it was also sacred, because it integrated practical and transcendent, because the consciousness they maintained prevented the kind of exploitative relationship that exhausts resources and collapses civilizations. We need to recover that understanding, need to ensure that as we return to sky mining, we do so with the full awareness that made the ancient practice successful. This means developing new forms of consciousness training for space workers. Not religious indoctrination, no, but genuine practices for maintaining cosmic awareness, for remembering that you're handling material from beyond Earth, that you're participating in processes larger than quarterly profits. It means designing our orbital stations not just as efficient factories but as contemplative spaces, places where the overview effect is facilitated, where connection to cosmic context is maintained, where meaning and purpose are built into the architecture itself. It means creating cultural frameworks that honor sky mining as sacred work, not just as jobs, that recognize the people doing this work as modern versions of the ancient aerial miners, bridge people, intermediaries between Earth and cosmos, guardians of a crucial relationship. This isn't naive romanticism. It's practical necessity, because the challenges of operating in space are enormous. The dangers are real. The psychological stresses of long-duration spaceflight, of living in hostile environments, of being isolated from Earth's comforts. These stresses break people unless they have deep sources of meaning and purpose. The aerial miners had such meaning. Their work was difficult, dangerous, demanding, but it was also transcendent. It connected them to cosmic processes. It gave them role and purpose that transcended individual survival. This sustained them across generations in conditions that should have been untenable. We need the same. Need meaning that can sustain humans through the challenges of space expansion. Need consciousness that makes the difficulty worthwhile. And the high stations teach us how. Show us that it's been done before. Prove that humans can maintain integrated cosmic consciousness while doing practical work in challenging conditions. We just need to remember, to study what they achieved, to adapt their techniques for our context. This is happening slowly, in various forms across different communities. Some asteroid mining proposals already include psychological and spiritual components. Some orbital station designs incorporate contemplative spaces. Some space agency training programs have begun including consciousness practices. It's fragmentary, incomplete, often dismissed by hard-headed engineers as unnecessary fluff. But it's happening. The remembering is beginning. And as more people engage with the history of the aerial miners, as the evidence from high-altitude sites becomes better known, as the sophistication of their practice is recognized, the momentum will build. The return won't be exactly like the original. Can't be. We have different tools, different constraints, different knowledge base. But the essential pattern can be restored. The integration of practical and transcendent. The consciousness that makes cosmic work meaningful. The understanding of humans as bridge people, as participants in universal processes. This is what's being recovered, what's being remembered, what's emerging as we prepare to return to the sky. And you're part of this emergence. Your awareness of these ideas, your consideration of these possibilities, this contributes to the field, adds to the growing consensus that space expansion needs to be more than merely technical. Every person who understands that the aerial miners were real, that their practice was sophisticated, that their consciousness was valid, every such person makes the full recovery more likely. You're not passive in this. You're active participant. The memes you carry, the ideas you share, the conversations you have, these shape what comes next. So if the vision of integrated cosmic consciousness appeals to you, if you want space expansion to include transcendent awareness, if you believe humanity can be more than mere extractors and exploiters, then engage with these ideas. Share them. Discuss them. Let them propagate through your networks. This is how cultures shift, how paradigms change, how new possibilities become actual. Not through top-down decree, but through grassroots adoption. Through individuals recognizing truth and choosing to align with it. The aerial miners are calling across time. Their structures stand as invitation. Their practice demonstrates possibility. And we, you, me, everyone engaging with these ideas, we're the ones who determine whether the invitation is accepted. Whether the possibility becomes actuality. Whether humanity's return to the sky includes consciousness or only capability. The choice is being made now. In moments like this. In conversations like this. In individual decisions to remember rather than forget. To integrate rather than fragment. To honor rather than exploit. What do you choose? How will you participate? What will you contribute to the emerging pattern? The aerial miners proved it's possible. We're proving whether it's inevitable. And so we come to the ending that isn't an ending. Because this story doesn't conclude. Continues. It's happening now. It includes you. The high stations still stand. Weathered but persistent. Marking the places where humans once did something remarkable. Something that challenges our assumptions about history, about capability, about what's possible when consciousness and craft align. They stand on cliffs in Peru, where tourists photograph them without understanding. They perch on Himalayan peaks, where pilgrims visit them and add their own meanings. They mark desert landscapes and mountain ranges on multiple continents, a global network of evidence waiting for full recognition. And they're speaking, always speaking, to anyone who learns the language of stone and metal and astronomical alignment. To anyone willing to question the standard narratives and look at evidence directly. What they say is simple, finally. Reducible to a few core insights that we've explored from multiple angles. Humans can expand consciousness while maintaining practical capability. Technology and transcendence aren't opposed. Material work and spiritual awareness can integrate. The cosmos isn't separate from us. We're made of stellar materials. We participate in cosmic processes whether we acknowledge it or not. Conscious participation is possible and produces different outcomes than unconscious subjection. Knowledge can be preserved across immense spans of time if it's encoded properly. In durable materials, in distributed systems, in patterns that trigger recognition when descendants are ready. What was achieved before can be achieved again. Perhaps must be achieved again if we're going to successfully expand beyond Earth. The aerial miners showed the pattern. We're in position to repeat it, amplified at greater scale. These insights aren't difficult to understand. They're not obscure or esoteric or requiring special initiation. They're simple, direct, available to anyone who considers the evidence and thinks carefully about implications. The difficulty isn't intellectual. It's psychological. It's the discomfort of revising fundamental assumptions, of accepting that official narratives are incomplete, of recognizing that we're not as unique or unprecedented as we'd like to believe. But if you can work through that discomfort, if you can let the old certainties dissolve and remain present with the uncertainty that follows, then something opens. A different way of seeing history, a different understanding of human potential, a different relationship with the cosmos. This opening is the real gift of the aerial miners. Not the metallurgical techniques or astronomical data, valuable as those are, but the demonstration that expanded consciousness is achievable and sustainable. That humans can live at the threshold between earth and sky, maintaining awareness of both, bridging the gap. And that this way of being produces good outcomes, creates lasting value, generates knowledge and capability that persist across millennia. If you take nothing else from this long wandering through high places and ancient practices, take this: you're capable of more than you've been taught. Your consciousness can expand. Your awareness can encompass cosmic scales. Your life can align with purposes larger than immediate survival and comfort. The aerial miners proved this. They weren't superhuman, weren't special. Were people like you with the same basic neurology, the same fundamental capacity for awareness. They just chose to cultivate that capacity, to organize their lives around expansion rather than contraction, to dedicate themselves to something larger than individual existence. And they succeeded. For thousands of years, they maintained practices that kept them connected to cosmic context, that gave them capabilities their contemporaries lacked, that created something beautiful and meaningful and lasting. You can do this too, not by abandoning modern life or retreating to mountain peaks, but by choosing, in your own circumstances, to cultivate cosmic awareness, to maintain consciousness of the larger context, to align your actions with purposes that transcend immediate concerns. This is practical. This produces results. This changes how you move through the world and what you're able to achieve. And collectively, as more individuals make this choice, as cosmic consciousness spreads through culture, it changes what becomes possible at species level. It makes the difference between space expansion that's merely technical and space expansion that's also transcendent. Between asteroid mining that's purely extractive and sky harvesting that's sustainable and sacred. Between becoming a spacefaring civilization in body only, or in consciousness too. This is what's at stake. This is why the story of the aerial miners matters now, in this moment, as we prepare to return to the sky. We're at a decision point, a threshold. We can go forward with consciousness or without it, can integrate or remain fragmented, can remember or continue forgetting. The outcome isn't determined. The future is genuinely open. What we choose, what you choose matters. So choose wisely, choose consciously, choose in alignment with the deepest understanding you can access. And if that understanding says that cosmic consciousness is real, that humans are meant to be bridge people, that the aerial miners demonstrated a valid and important way of being, then honor that understanding. Live from it. Let it shape your choices. Contribute to the collective remembering, because we're all in this together, all part of the same human story. All descendants of the same ancestors who looked at the stars and wondered and reached. The aerial miners were one expression of that reaching. We're another. And between us, spanning the millennia, is a continuity of consciousness. A thread of awareness that never quite broke, that's strengthening now as we remember what was known before. You're part of that thread, part of that continuity, part of the ongoing story of human cosmic consciousness. And the high stations, those impossible structures on impossible cliffs, they stand as proof that the story is real, that the reaching is valid, that humans can succeed in establishing connection between earth and sky. They stand as invitation, as evidence, as encouragement, and they wait, patient as stone, durable as star metal, present across millennia, waiting for the full remembering, waiting for humanity to return to sky mining, in body and consciousness both, waiting for you, for me, for all of us to recognize what we are and what we're capable of becoming. The waiting is nearly over. The return is beginning. The remembering is happening. And you're here for it, present at the threshold, able to participate in the emergence. So participate, however that looks for you, whatever form it takes. Build your own high station. Watch the sky with attention. Forge your own tools from whatever materials you have access to. And remember, always remember, you're heir to the aerial miners, descendant of sky harvesters, inheritor of cosmic consciousness. This is your nature, your birthright, your calling. The structures stand. The invitation remains open. The sky still offers gifts. All that's needed is for you to reach, to bridge, to participate. The aerial miners showed it's possible. You prove whether it continues. The night is deep now. Your breathing has found its rhythm. Slow, steady. The pace of someone drifting between waking and sleep, between thought and dream. This is the perfect state for what remains to be said. Because the final truth about the aerial miners isn't intellectual. It's experiential. It's something you feel rather than understand. Something that bypasses analysis and speaks directly to whatever in you recognizes ancient patterns. Let yourself feel it now. The pull of high places, the draw of the sky, the sense that somewhere, in some essential way, you belong at the threshold between Earth and cosmos. This isn't imagination. It's recognition. Your consciousness identifying its larger context. Your awareness remembering what it's always known but temporarily forgot. You are made of star stuff. This is not metaphor. The atoms in your body were forged in stellar cores billions of years ago. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the carbon in your cells, all of it cycled through supernovae, ejected into space, incorporated into the dust cloud that became our solar system. You are cosmic material temporarily organized into human form, briefly conscious, momentarily able to reflect on your own nature. The aerial miners understood this in their bodies. Every time they handled meteoritic metal, every time they forged tools from material that had fallen from the sky, they were touching their own origins, working with the same stuff they were made of, closing the circuit between cosmic source and human expression. This created a consciousness that we've lost, a visceral understanding of connection that we can only recover by deliberate practice. But we can recover it. The capacity hasn't atrophied. It's just dormant, waiting, and it awakens through attention, through looking at stars and really seeing them, through holding rocks and recognizing them as ancient, through breathing and remembering that the oxygen you're inhaling was produced by distant suns, processed through countless cycles, now entering your lungs and enabling your consciousness. This is miracle, not supernatural violation of natural law, but the actual miracle of physical reality. That consciousness can arise from matter. That awareness can emerge from stellar debris. That meaning can exist in a universe of atoms and void. The aerial miners lived in constant recognition of this miracle. Their entire civilization was organized around honoring it, participating in it, maintaining awareness of it across generations. And they left their structures as proof that such awareness is sustainable. That humans can maintain cosmic consciousness not just in brief mystical moments but as the foundation of entire cultures. This is the gift. This is what the high stations preserve and transmit. Not techniques for forging meteoritic metal, though those are valuable. Not astronomical alignments, though those are precise. but the demonstration that cosmic consciousness can be the basis of human civilization, that we can build our lives around it, that it works, produces good outcomes, creates lasting value. And if we're going to become truly spacefaring, not just technically capable but psychologically and spiritually prepared, we need to recover this foundation. We need to rebuild our civilization on cosmic consciousness, on the recognition that Earth is not separate from space, that we're already cosmic beings, that expansion beyond our planet is return rather than departure. The aerial miners proved this is possible, showed us the pattern, left the evidence. Now it's our turn, our generation and the ones immediately following. We're the ones who'll determine whether humanity's second attempt at sky mining includes consciousness or only capability, whether we repeat the full pattern or only part of it, whether we integrate or fragment, whether we remember or continue forgetting. And the choice, finally, is intimate, personal, made by individuals in moments like this, when the night is deep and the barriers are thin and truth can slip through defenses that daylight maintains. So I'm asking you directly now, in this liminal space, do you recognize yourself in this story? Do you feel the connection to those ancient builders? Do you hear the calling across millennia? If you do, if something in you responds yes, recognizes truth, feels the pull toward high places and cosmic awareness, then you're being invited to participate. Not in some grand destiny or cosmic mission, not with burden of saving humanity or fulfilling prophecy, just in the quiet, patient work of maintaining consciousness, of watching the sky, of remembering what you are, of choosing again and again to align with cosmic context rather than contracting into purely earthly concerns. This is enough. This is the work. Simple but not easy. Subtle but profound. And it's the same work the aerial miners did. The same practice that sustained their civilization across thousands of years. The same consciousness that we need to recover if we're going to succeed in our return to the sky. So let this be your takeaway if nothing else sticks. Let this be what remains when the details fade and the arguments blur. You're cosmic. Literally, physically, undeniably. Your star stuff. Your awareness arising from ancient materials. Your consciousness participating in universal processes. This is what you are. What you've always been. What you can never stop being, no matter how much conventional culture tries to convince you you're just a consumer, just a worker, just a temporary arrangement of matter with no larger significance. The aerial miners knew better, lived better, built their entire civilization around the truth of cosmic connection. And they're calling you, yes, you specifically, the consciousness attending to these words in this moment, to remember that truth, to reclaim it, to live from it, not as obligation but as invitation, not as burden but as gift. The high stations stand, the structures wait, the evidence remains, and the sky, that infinite expanse above, that cosmic context we're embedded in, that vast pattern we participate in, the sky still offers gifts, still rains down fragments from beyond, still provides opportunities for connection, still invites partnership. The aerial miners showed us how to accept the invitation, how to position ourselves optimally, how to harvest what falls from heaven with reverence and craft and sustained attention. Now it's our turn, our opportunity, our moment to choose whether we'll remember or forget, integrate or fragment, participate or merely observe. What do you choose? In this moment, in this deep night, with barriers thin and truth accessible, what do you choose? The aerial miners chose cosmic consciousness, chose to build their lives around it, chose to maintain it across generations despite difficulty and danger and constant challenge. And they succeeded, created something beautiful and lasting, something that speaks across millennia, something that calls to you now. Will you answer? Will you remember? Will you reach? The choice is yours. Always has been. Always will be. But the invitation stands. Open. Patient. Real. The civilization that mined the sky isn't lost. It's dormant. Waiting. Ready to awaken in anyone who chooses to remember. Ready to awaken in you. So here we are, at the true end of this long night's journey. The sky outside your window is the same sky the aerial miners watched. The stars are the same stars, though shifted slightly by precession. The meteor showers are the same showers, following the same orbits, offering the same gifts. And you are the same human fundamentally, same biological structure, same capacity for awareness, same potential for cosmic consciousness. The only difference is choice. The only gap is intention. The only separation is willingness. The aerial miners chose, intended, willing themselves toward expanded awareness despite all the pressures toward contraction, toward ordinary life, toward focusing on immediate survival rather than cosmic participation. And that choice created everything. The high stations, the technologies, the civilization that persisted for thousands of years. All of it emerged from the simple choice to remain cosmically conscious, to maintain awareness of the larger context, to position themselves at the threshold between earth and sky. You can make the same choice, right now, in this moment, not dramatically, not with sudden transformation or mystical revelation, but quietly, steadily, with the same patience the aerial miners demonstrated across generations. You can choose to look up more often, to watch the sky with attention, to recognize the stars not as distant lights but as your origins, your context, your connection to processes larger than human scale. You can choose to learn about meteors and asteroids and the constant rain of cosmic material onto Earth's surface. To understand that you're living in a flow of stellar debris, that your planet is continuously receiving gifts from beyond. You can choose to study the high stations, to learn what they teach about sustained cosmic consciousness, to recognize them as valid achievements worthy of your attention and respect. You can choose to question the standard narratives, to look at evidence directly, to think independently about what's possible and what our ancestors achieved. You can choose to integrate consciousness work into your practical life, to maintain cosmic awareness while handling daily responsibilities, to bridge rather than separate. All of this is available. All of this is possible. All of this is the inheritance the aerial miners left for exactly this moment, when their descendants would be technically capable of returning to sky mining but psychologically unprepared unless they remembered the full pattern. You're that descendant. This is that moment. The inheritance is being offered. Will you accept it? I'm not asking for commitment to some specific practice or belief system, not requesting that you join anything or adopt any particular ideology. I'm simply asking, will you remain open? Will you consider the possibility that cosmic consciousness is real and achievable? Will you experiment with practices that might expand your awareness? Will you look at the sky occasionally and remember what you are? This is enough. This is the beginning. The crack in consensus reality that allows something else to enter. And once it enters, once you've genuinely felt cosmic connection even once, it changes things. Not completely, not instantly, but subtly, persistently, cumulatively. You start noticing patterns you missed before. Start questioning assumptions you previously accepted. Start feeling pulls toward things that previously seemed irrelevant. This is the awakening of inherited knowledge. The activation of dormant capacities. The remembering that the aerial miners encoded in their structures, waiting for minds ready to receive it. And it spreads. Not virally, not dramatically, but steadily, person by person, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. Each individual who remembers makes it slightly easier for the next person. Each consciousness that expands creates a template, a resonance, a possibility that others can attune to. This is how cultures shift, how paradigms change, how humanity evolves not through biological mutation but through consciousness transformation. The aerial miners started such a shift thousands of years ago. Then it faded, went dormant, waited. Now it's returning. Through multiple channels, multiple communities, multiple forms. Ancient knowledge being rediscovered. Cosmic consciousness being reclaimed. The pattern being restored. And you, by engaging with this material, by considering these ideas, by remaining open to possibilities outside standard frameworks, you're participating in the return. You're part of the remembering, part of the emergence, part of the shift that will determine whether humanity's expansion into space is merely technical or also transcendent. So thank you for your attention, for your patience, for your willingness to consider strange ideas at odd hours. for being the kind of consciousness that asks questions and seeks understanding and remains open to mystery. This is exactly what's needed. This is the consciousness that will carry humanity forward. Not blind belief or rigid certainty, but curious engagement, questioning acceptance, open-minded skepticism. The aerial miners would recognize you, would see in you the same qualities they cultivated, the willingness to look beyond accepted narratives, the capacity to maintain cosmic awareness, the dedication to asking difficult questions and sitting with uncomfortable answers. You're their descendant in the ways that matter most. Not necessarily genetic, but conscious, spiritual, intentional, and their structures stand waiting for you. Not literally, you don't need to trek to Peru or Tibet, though you can if you wish, but symbolically, metaphysically, in the realm of meaning and purpose and consciousness. The high stations are templates, patterns, possibilities encoded in durable form, and they're accessible to anyone who learns to read them, who develops the consciousness to recognize what's being taught. You're developing that consciousness now, through exposure to these ideas, through consideration of these possibilities, through the simple act of remaining attentive through this long wandering exploration. And that development continues, long after this audio ends, long after you forget the specific words and arguments, because you've been exposed to the pattern. It's entered your awareness, and patterns have power. They propagate, they influence, they shape what becomes possible. The pattern of the aerial miners, cosmic consciousness integrated with practical capability, transcendent awareness grounding technological achievement. This pattern is ancient and powerful and remarkably persistent. It survived the collapse of the high stations, survived the dispersion of the original practitioners, survived millennia of forgetting and obscuring and dismissing, and now it's returning, awakening, spreading, through you, through everyone who engages with these ideas, through the collective remembering that's happening across multiple disciplines and communities. The aerial miners are not lost. They're alive in everyone who chooses cosmic consciousness, who maintains awareness of the larger context, who positions themselves at the threshold between earth and sky. They're alive in you if you choose it, if you accept the inheritance, if you continue the practice in your own way, at your own scale, in your own time. The high stations call, the structures stand. The invitation remains open, and the sky, that vast, dark, infinite sky, the sky still offers gifts, still rains down fragments of cosmic history, still invites partnership with anyone willing to watch, to harvest, to remember. The civilization that mined the sky is not lost. It's you. It's us. It's humanity remembering what we've always been. Sky miners, bridge people, consciousness participating in cosmic processes. Welcome home. Welcome to the high stations. Welcome to the remembering. The work continues. The watching persists. The harvest never ended. It just paused, waiting. And now, finally, we're ready to resume. Sweet dreams, Sky Miner. May your sleep be deep and your dreaming cosmic. The stars are waiting. The work calls. The pattern continues. And you're exactly where you need to be. Exactly who you need to be. Exactly ready for what comes next. Rest now. Dream of high places. Dream of star metal. Dream of hands reaching toward heaven and heaven reaching back. Tomorrow you'll wake, and the world will look slightly different, because you'll see it with new eyes. Cosmic eyes. Eyes that remember. And that's everything. That's the gift. That's the inheritance. See you in the sky, friend. See you at the threshold. The aerial miners welcome you home.